Okay. All right, looks like we are live now, so we'll go ahead and get this started with a roll call of our CAC members. So just going down the list, we'll start with Lee Fawn.
Yep.
All right, Mark Mataney,
Here.
Jeff Arterburn,
Here.
Mark Cadwalder,
Here.
Manuel Lesprance.
Here.
Art Vollmer is not here presently, but he might be joining us later. Jimmy Kane. He's here on the screen. And John Pierce. And Ron Lohman. All right, and next we can go ahead and do an introduction of the rest of our guests. I guess I'll get started. My name is Daniel Lusk. I work with the Wildlife Management Division out of Santa Fe, and then we'll just go this way.
I'm Caitlin Rule. I'm the Wildlife Habitat Restoration for Santa Fe.
Brock Lorenzen, I'm a habitat biologist out of Santa Fe.
Mike Rule, Assistant Chief of Fisheries for New Mexico Department of Game and Fish.
Corey Webster, Fish Habitat Coordinator for Mexico Game and Fish.
Andrea Petrullo, I'm the habitat biologist on Albuquerque.
Julie Burton. I'm just here to see what's going on.
Zach Herbert, Wildlife Program Lead for BLM.
Ron Lohman, I'm Conservation Chairman for New Mexico Trout out of Albuquerque.
I'm Deb Caldwell, and I'm the Exec Director with Friends of Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge.
Jonathan Manley, I'm President of the same organization.
I'm Yvette Pearl, I'm the Regional Fisheries Program Leader for Service.
Joe, all leaves better have.
That's for sure.
I never did BLM.
And we do have Art Vollmer here also, so we have all CDC members present for today's meeting. Today's meeting is the annual update meeting where we talk about status updates on already funded and prioritized projects. We talk a little bit about the ideas that we have cooking up for this year, and just give kind of an overview of what that's sort of looking like. Today, we also have an update from the subcommittee that was formed the last meeting. So kind of a full agenda today, and I guess that we can go ahead and jump right in and get into the prioritized projects update. So I'm not sure if Caitlin wants to start or.
Yeah, I can start that. Pull up the list.
Yeah,
This one.
which one would you like? Which
The
one's-
24.
Much better picture.
Let's share my screen. Oops.
Thank you, Liz.
Maybe one of them.
Use the most possible is.
Okay, go for it. Yeah, so real quickly, we just thought we'd run through projects that were prioritized in 23 and 24. And there's probably not a whole lot new on this list really from the last time we met. Everything in green is completed. Projects highlighted in red, either there was insufficient funds or they got canceled. The remaining project, Rio Bonito Restoration, our update there is that it's set to start hopefully in April. So there's some potential for that to be a CAC field trip if folks are interested. But that kind of wraps up the 24 list, fiscal year 24. And then I'll start on updates from what you recently prioritized and then maybe hand it over to fisheries. So thus far, since that prioritization meeting, we've made some headway in both the Pyramid Mountain south of Lordsburg on fence conversions, as well as the Macho area near Roswell for that wildlife habitat connectivity project. And we've also seen some burns done this fall on the Santa Fe and Carson National Forest. Fish folks can jump in.
So pretty much all good news for fisheries projects. The Whitewater Creek restoration, Corey, is starting this week. Next week? Today.
Today they have,
And then the other piece of good news there is that the budget for that was $500,000 and it came in way under that. Which has allowed us to shift funding down, so it's more like 200,000 total, right, Corey?
Yeah, 186,000.
Plus the 25,000 in engineering,
That's.
that's included.
Yes, yeah.
So there you go. So yeah, that is rolling and should be completed in about a month, right?
That's our target. At the end of this.
Okay. And then let's see, going down the list for fish stuff, we'll go all the way down to El Rito and Middle Conneaut barriers. So, as you all probably know, HSP is one stream of funds that we utilize to do habitat work, including fish barriers. And we got $1 million to do fish barrier work from the legislature a couple years ago. We have until the end of June 2026 to spend that money. We were going to do a barrier on Jacks Creek on the Pecos with that money, and unfortunately, there was a snag with the cabin lessee up there and a threat of a lawsuit, and we're not able to do that project, at least as it had been designed. So we were planning on using that $1 million to do that project. And basically, we can't do that project, so we went to the next barrier projects that we had in mind, which are what's on your list here from last year. So we do not need, those projects are going to get done, but we do not need Habitat Stamp Program money to do them. When we get, if we can find a workable solution to Jacks Creek, we may end up sometime in the future bringing that to you all, but we're not there, and we're able, that Middle Conneaut barrier will be built this summer. And then when we see what that costs, we'll be able to almost certainly do the El Rito barrier assessment and hopefully actually also have some implementation money for that or for something else. So it's just a waiting game right now to see what the cost of Middle Conneaut will actually be. So we did the Snow Lake dredge evaluation. We are almost at a final report. We've bounced a draft report back and forth on that a few times. And that was, we thought that would cost 50. It costs a little over 30, I think 33,000. And so we are now down to solar bee purchases. Corey's been working on that. We recently got some quotes. As you all know, it has been a worse than bad snow year. And the status of Kamado is pretty good right now. Unfortunately, the goldfish are coming back there because of the series of fish kills and the continual loss of tiger muskie. So we've been working with the vet and other Forest Service folks, and we are hoping to purchase solar bees for Kamado Lake in the near future. And it's looking like there's plenty of fisheries money to get that done at this point. So like I said, pretty much all good news in terms of these projects getting done. So that's what I got.
Yeah, any questions, comments about prioritized projects and implementation from the group? Yeah.
I'm interested in what's happening with the Vacas. Is that, the money was there, at least from the Habitat Stamp Program. I didn't remember if Forest Service money was also needed.
No, yeah, so it's shovel ready for this fall. So we'll be implementing beginning this fall, and it'll probably go over the winter and have some spring activities as well.
Okay.
Anything else in the group? If not, so today we do have Stephanie Herbert, State Wildlife Lead for the Bureau of Land Management, and also Yvette Perot, Fish Lead for Region 3, talking here, prepared to present a little bit about finances on the federal side and kind of how Habitat Stamp fits into that, because it's just one piece of what's going on the whole landscape. And so And we thought it would be good to give you guys a little bit more of an overview of that. So if we're ready for that, I can queue up the presentation. Maybe Steph, if you want to go first. Okay. I think you can do it from there.
This is probably not new for a lot of you. I know we all have agency backgrounds, and have been partners to agencies in various capacities for a long time, but, I thought Yvette thought it might be helpful to kind of lay a landscape of where HSP falls within our program and the importance of it and how it kind of ties in with other funding partners. Just to kind of queue up, you know, how we currently like see the HSP and like how we're grateful for its presence, especially right now. And then I'll kind of morph into a couple of like project categories and maybe give you some time to think them through and give me feedback so I can bring that back to our field offices. Okay, yeah, I think we can start. So the text is a little small, sorry about that, but essentially these are the four main spheres of funding that BLM New Mexico relies on currently. Starting from top left to bottom right in pink or red, our BLM wildlife. Oh, Jimmy's raising his hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah, I'm still looking at the PDF of the projects.
Oh, yeah, let me see if I can change that. How's that?
Cool. So I'll run through these quickly, but if we have questions, we spend more time given the topic. So wildlife program funds are funneled down to Congress appropriations to BLM headquarters, and then those are funneled down through headquarters to each individual state. And those funds are for labor, project dollars, partnerships, grants that the federal government provides. All of that comes out of the same pot. And those allocations fluctuate year to year and sometimes in unanticipated ways, depending on acts of Congress, obviously, in determining the allocations in the budget. Right now, we're under a continuing resolution, so we're not spending funds because we're being fiscally aware until we have our allocated budget, hopefully next week. And so there's some like challenges and like it's stable money. We're always happy to have it. We definitely want to serve like the public, but sometimes we wish we could do more essentially. And you know, this is kind of our first stop for these projects that you guys probably see here at the HSP is they've applied for program funds and we just might not have funding to fund all of the project or the project on top of the labor, et cetera, that we have to fund year to year. So just kind of like from there, there are these opportunities that arise and sometimes BLM headquarters will get larger pots of money like bill or IRA funds that can be put into habitat connectivity or landscape level projects. Those are typically larger sums of money than what I can provide to field offices for any given project through our normal budget. But they're really competitive because they're offered to all of the Western states and we're all competing for those sources of funds. So while they can be kind of a boon when you get them, it's not guaranteed that those will be available every year. And when they are, it's not guaranteed they'll be even within your state allocated. One thing about those though is headquarters obviously likes to see projects with multiple partners. And so that's where we can start leveraging funds from HSP and other NGOs to be more successful in getting larger headquarters funding opportunities when they arise. So if we don't fund it internally through either a program budget or through a headquarters opportunity, or maybe we can partially fund it through there, that's when we'll start to reach out to our partners. And so there are the NGO partner opportunities through lots of different folks. Trout Unlimited and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers are often partners with us, but there's dozens of them throughout the state. And those funds aren't always available. They're kind of intermittently available depending on the organization and the funding cycle. But we really value those partnerships. sometimes it's challenging because how those funds are prioritized within the organization don't align with the BLM's priorities for that given year, or maybe those funds are allocated for Forest Service or a different like land ownership entity. And so while there may be more consistent partnerships, the funding isn't always consistent every single year, just depending on a lot of factors. And we understand that as well. So it's great to have it. It's great to have those partnerships in case it arises. We don't rely on it, but we are grateful for it. And then the last thing is like the Department of Game and Fish, and HSP is specifically obviously what we're here for today. And that, unlike some other funding sources, is consistent and reliable, like a known entity, usually kind of a forecasted quantity. There's limited competition for it, and it can be leveraged for additional funds with NGO partners, with headquarters, with our own project budget. And so I think, you know, each of these funding opportunities are great, but HSP plays a really helpful role. So even though it's limited funding capacity, knowing that it's there and that we can apply for these projects every year is something that is kind of invaluable. But of course, you know, the BLM priorities don't always align with the HSP's priorities for the year, and we're also aware that there are many constraints within that. And so as helpful and consistent as it is, like, we are also always trying to be as successful as we can be. I think that's all I wanted to say about the funding landscape, and we can maybe go to the next slide. So fencing has kind of been a hot topic, especially in a fence out state. It's the first important step for restoration investments on the landscape. I think nobody wants to pay for the fence because it's probably not like the flashiest part of restoration, but it truly is the first step to kind of gaining momentum with other partnerships and like a snowball effect. And because of its importance, I kind of just wanted to go through like how the BLM looked at fencing and how we assigned fencing projects to different programs, because that might not be like something that's super public facing, but it's useful information to have when you're evaluating projects for fencing, obviously. So the wildlife program and the range program are the two main programs that put fences and maintain fences on the landscape, but they are different spheres entirely, often with the same challenges, but in different capacities. So the wildlife program is responsible for installing and maintaining fences that are either initiated by the wildlife program and solely benefit wildlife. So these are exclusion fences like we propose all the time for riparian areas, so wildlife waters, seep springs, headwaters. You guys are really familiar with those. And it's also wildlife friendly fence conversions where fences would otherwise not need to be maintained for the benefit of wildlife only. Even if they're boundary fences or pasture fences, it's kind of us volunteering to bring that up to the highest standard for wildlife. BLM obviously uses our dedicated wildlife program funds whenever possible to fund those projects, but they're expensive, and that's when we get into piecemealing a lot of collaborators' funds together to have a landscape approach. And the BLM range program is very similar. Like they handle fences that are boundary fences and pasture fences for the benefit of grazing only. And so those are permittee maintained or BLM maintained, depending on the different agreements that are across the landscape. And if they are installing a new fence, it's required to be wildlife friendly. And so you'll see that like as they maintain fences, permittees will use wildlife friendly specs. But I mostly just wanted to highlight here that like the BLM range program similarly has their program funnel for funds through headquarters and Congress, and they devote those funds to grazing specific fences. But those funds can't be applied to wildlife driven, wildlife only projects. They need to be beneficial to the grazing program. And they also rely on their partners for supplemental funding as well. So we have kind of these parallel programs doing fencing work on the landscape, but they often don't touch the same fences, if that makes sense. And so when we bring projects to the HSP for fencing rehab, like, you know, y'all voted for on Taos Plateau and in the Macho area, those are wildlife responsible projects. If we don't get money here or through a different wildlife NGO that we work with, or a different agency partnership, we'll have to try and find a wildlife program funding source within BLM for those. There's no like grazing funds that are devoted to those, if that makes sense. Okay. So kind of talking about leveraging funding, these are just some projects that y'all have funded that have kind of snowballed into these massive partner efforts. And I see this as like our most successful HSP projects, maybe not these individual projects, a bunch have been successful in various ways, but these have been really successful in gaining traction in the wildlife community at large. So the Taos Plateau project, which y'all put funding into just as recent as last year, now has support from NIFWIF, Soil Water Conservation Districts, NMACD. The department has various funds, including HSP involved, NMDOT, Rocky Mountain Elk, MDF, NWF. You can see them on there. Tons of partnerships have put labor or financial investment into this. Same with the Pecos District net wire fence replacement, or like the Macho landscape fence wire fence replacement. You may have seen it called as well, depending on when it's been pitched to you essentially, but that's been over 100 miles of net wire fence replaced with, again, almost 10 different agencies and local ranchers also funding the replacement. And so, you know, these are so expensive that not any one entity could fund them, and especially not BLM internally. But we've been able to devote lots of labor funds, and we've been able to apply to funding through headquarters for some of these projects as well. And so these are just like instances where we've been really grateful to lean on our partners, but also are doing everything we can to fund as much as we can in-house to show our dedication. You know, we're not just asking for funds, we're like matching them in any way possible. And then a slightly different project is the Seboya Springs pipe fence, which I believe was 2014 when that pipe fence went in. But that project has had like a huge uplift, and it's like a nice, beautiful wet meadow now from the spring head. But every year we have folks from Albuquerque Wildlife Federation come in and do Z-dike style structures and various sorts of like using hands and hand tools because it's in the wilderness, but like small scale uplift to this entire like riparian system now. And we also got a sizable grant through the NMED, who applied to an EPA grant for additional like hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think, of investment in this area. And BLM goes out and does, you know, treatments for invasive species, and also helps kind of do some of these like larger rock structures that you'll see. So although it started out as an HSP project, it's kind of morphed into this landscape level multi-partner approach to riparian restoration that probably wouldn't have had such investment without the initial fence and like then turning that fence into a pipe fence later. Okay. So I'll wrap up pretty quickly, but the next couple of slides are just going to be project proposals that our field office has been working with Kaylin and Brock and other field biologists to kind of troubleshoot and come up with ideas that would be really helpful for BLM to implement on the landscape. And y'all don't have to get back to me right now, but if you have any initial thoughts on like how to make this more more easily prioritized or like more interesting for HSP funds, I would be really excited to hear that and take that back to our field offices so that they can start to plan those programs with y'all's input in mind, so that you see good proposals that, you know, like you're familiar with and you want to see come summer. So this is kind of a new idea that I've been working on with Danny and Kaylin, but several field offices have lots of wildlife waters on the landscape, and to maintain them would be hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that we may or may not have depending on the funding year for BLM. And I'm familiar with the CAC's maintenance guidance from a couple of years ago. That's been really helpful for me to understand. And we hope that this approach, aligns with that, but essentially instead of asking for 1 or 2 maintenance jobs, you know, like smaller pots of funding from HSP, taking like a whole landscape, like the Fort Stanton landscape or the Cabazon area landscape, and overhauling that to make drinkers or pipeline systems longer holding waters, more reliable for wildlife distribution to rely on. So not just doing 1 or 2, but maybe overhauling 10 or 15 at a time, and putting a large investment in not having to pay for maintenance so much down the line, essentially, like kind of doing 1 upfront cost. And so these like different landscapes will have different impacts. Cabazon's known for pronghorn, but we also know that elk utilize the Rio Puerco in that area heavily as they're migrating through. And Fort Stanton has a lot of large game in that area, and so pick a species essentially that would benefit. We can base this on what we know for utilization data, and we can put out some game cameras to kind of inform some of these decisions, but I was just kind of hoping to get some feedback on like maintenance at this scale as opposed to maintenance at a smaller scale, which always, you know, isn't maybe like the best project proposal for y'all. Okay, I think we can go to the next one. This is maybe something that you're more used to seeing, these like scalable landscape restorations. We have several of them this year. The Arroyo del Puerto Chiquito is in Tausfield office, and that's a noxious weed treatment, maybe riparian species planting, maybe some juniper encroachment thinning for the benefit of fish and wildlife, ongoing Rio Bonito habitat improvements. We're hoping to finish that up next year with additional funding from y'all. And Danica was also excited to see, you know, potential signage and kiosks to inform the public about the work that we've been doing out there as an additional ask. Roswell Field Office also is hoping to do some landscape level treatments for noxious weeds and do some upland and riparian planting for the benefit of large game in the North Pecos ACEC area. And this one's a little bit different. The Carlsbad Field Office is looking to do some mesquite treatments, including thinning and mastication in important habitat areas for lesser prairie chicken, but that would also help the pronghorn and mule deer populations in the area. And so, you know, I don't want to spend too much time on these because you're probably familiar with what these projects look like, but happy to go into more detail there if you have questions. I think we can go to the next slide. This last one is something that I'm curious to get y'all's feedback on as well. The Tausfield office is interested in moving 3 water gaps and replacing those with like a larger riparian friendly fence south of all of those water gaps to improve wildlife connectivity and kind of do some uplift for this riparian area. I think like the conversation I'm hoping to have is how y'all feel about smaller investment riparian projects that might snowball into larger investments over time with like investment both by BLM and other partners into an area. So it might not be a project as large as Rio Bonito, but it might be something where we can kind of slowly chip away at an area and be like pragmatic in our approach, but like a first investment with the hope of a continued investment over time in some of these areas. Because some of those smaller scale projects are a little bit easy on the NEPA. We have CXs sometimes, or we just have standing NEPA we can tier to. And it's easier, especially with like the economy right now and like the price of labor and project infrastructure. Some of these smaller projects are easier for our biologists to bite off essentially and promise to get done within 1 fiscal year. So yeah.
Like what scale? Is that something that's done just by your staff? You bring others in with volunteer partners help?
I think we could do both. We've had folks kind of come in and volunteer, like through BHA. There's a lot of fencing initiatives that go on, and some of what they do is just bring labor and work weekends. We also have staff that are able to do this. I think this is only like 230 feet long total. Apologies, that might be incorrect, but I am pretty sure. And so that's not a huge investment. So it's just the 3 water gaps. That might be something that we could do in-house, but it also depends on some of our labor crews throughout the state and their availability and funding as well. So I think that would probably be project by project, but those are questions I would love to include in the proposals if that's something that would be helpful for y'all to see. As you prioritize projects.
Just
Yeah.
clarification, the pre-proposal here would be to build fences along the canyon rim to completely exclude cattle from going all the way down the sides and everywhere around the creek. Is that
I think that the idea is to replace, there's a series of 3 water gaps and to replace them with one at the downstream, one larger,
So just the gaps themselves.
yeah, just removing the gaps themselves. So this is more of a naturalized system with like one riparian fence at the bottom. I'm trying to think of the specifications. There's like a couple of industry standards, I think. One of them is bison jack. Does that sound familiar?
it's the same,
yeah.
same style of these?
No, different style. That is what would be replaced.
Okay, those
And-
are built not to blow out runoffs.
Yeah. This would be more of like a pipe fence style, but that would allow for wildlife movement through the canyon still. So, more longevity, less obstruction.
And in runoff? It wouldn't be blown out, sorry.
No,
Or-
no, yeah, there's a couple of different, types of fences that are, essentially like act as a pipe fence would, but are friendly to wildlife traversing through riparian systems. I should have put a picture of that up there, but I didn't really
Okay.
do. Apologies.
Yeah, I'm just familiar with that kind,
Yeah,
which I think are pretty effective against cattle.
yeah. So that's all I have. I know I ran through it quickly. I'm happy to chat with y'all about this now or in the future. I think there's an agenda slot for it. I'll also stay after, if y'all have questions or suggestions about information you'd like to see in the proposals to maybe make them more successful in the future.
I'm on the state board for Backcountry Hunters Neighbors. I just want to thank you for. Alice, when I go back and say, she said, thank you that we need women in the future. So that's all I got on that.
Yeah, great.
And how are y'all doing with the? Yes, you talk about agency picking up.
Yeah.
You have the staff, you haven't funded yet. What you getting?
We're doing the best we can. I will say some years are more challenging than others and some landscapes are more challenging than others. So certainly we have field offices that have hundreds of wildlife waters on the landscape. And you can imagine if each one of those needs $5,000 to $10,000, that can easily.
So were those all done with horse account crews or do you do some contracting for maintenance itself on fence?
Yeah, different field
Bit of
offices do it differently. If you go back a couple slides, actually, one more. Yeah, the bottom left photo, that's actually me and my partner, wildlife biologist, when I was working at the Rio Puerto field office at Cedro, going out and like repairing this fence by ourselves. And then the next picture right of it is the next growing season. So this actually became a pollinator hotspot in Cabazon, and there's horsetail and milkweed that took over that exclosure. That exclosure is against an earthen dam, and that was built originally with HSP funds. And then we used, back when HSP was giving some funds kind of annually for maintenance, we used that to order barbed wire, and we've been using that year after year to do our best to maintain these fences. And so a lot of what we're doing is met with labor dollars. When we have large project funds that we can expend towards maintenance, I try and prioritize those towards maintenance of existing structures on the landscape. And so we are doing that. It's just hard to keep up with it, I think. And so that's where like these landscape level approaches would help us get ahead of it or kind of get on top of it to a point where like we can replace like the next third to right photo, which is not in great shape, with something that's like a larger catchment system that we wouldn't have to maintain, but that would create reliable water sources for pronghorn in this landscape. Where, you know, that's not always like the case.
So are you guys starting to prioritize water catchment areas now? Because it kind of like disappeared for the most part, you know, nobody knew anything. So you guys are starting to categorize them to what is priority,
Yeah,
because that was a big part of it is there's some that are absolutely necessary and I don't think everybody realizes that.
yeah,
And there's a lot that aren't,
yeah,
or there's a lot that were well made that just need some maintenance.
Yeah.
Or there's a lot that wasn't made well.
yeah.
So, you know, that prioritization would be everything.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm glad you took it there because I forgot, but that's kind of what I'm hoping to have the conversation is like, what would you need to see to feel comfortable putting a lot of investment into maintenance of existing HSP waters? Because we could give you some game camera data, we can like work with species biologists and get GPS collar data and try and demonstrate utilization on the landscape. We can kind of do some of that, but we can't do a full utilization study at like a research level. And so if like, I guess that's kind of like the transparency I want to have, and that we can show you what's utilized based on like when we go, are there hoof marks, is there high utilization evidence? Like we can put game cameras on those and make sure that we understand how they're being utilized to confirm that. Kind of evidence from the field. We can take pictures of scat in the area. Like we can kind of paint a picture, but we can't necessarily do a full collar study because we don't have, you know, that would be a huge investment of time and energy, and something that we'd have to partner with like folks at research universities or with the department, species biologists, of course. So, where on the spectrum, I guess, would you like to see the prioritization land, given a data-driven approach is like what we're hoping for?
Yeah, well, obviously the data, I mean, any data that can
Yeah,
come from it. And not just that surrounding area, but the areas a little bit further away
Yeah.
that are in that 1 to 5 mile radius, because
yeah,
the landscape is bigger than that.
yeah. These, we're looking at like the whole Cabazon area, not just 1 to 5 miles, but like, a whole landscape. And so, I guess before I go back to the field and like say, like, let's do it, like, let's pull all of this data together and do like a really clear prioritization of waters for maintenance. I want to make sure that that's a good investment of folks' time. And if it's a non-starter, like it's good to know. Or if it's like, let's ask first for data for that research, you know, and spend a year prioritizing it like in collaboration with y'all's funding, that would be good to know. Or if it's like, do what you can with what you have, and we're gonna like try and evaluate this. And we would like to see that proposal with the others, like that would also be good to know. Like, I'm open to any of those. I just want to make sure that I'm not sending folks down a rabbit hole, if that makes sense, if y'all aren't only feeling lukewarm about that investment. Hopefully that's not coming across as like negative. I just want to be like realistic with our limited resources.
What about, you know, as far as public use,
Yeah,
licenses, anything like that, access, something like that, because you know, to have an area that is popular or that's improved access and use of it, maybe, I think would fit our needs, our
Okay.
purpose.
yeah.
Jimmy's
I have a
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah, so I just wanted to remind everybody what the problems were with the maintenance issues that caused us to dial back our support of that. And so some of the big issues were that there was no evidence that there was any agency effort to maintain these. When they were submitting maintenance requests, they were like copy and pasted, and it gave us no confidence that these sites were actually individually visited and assessed for what maintenance they needed. Just like every site needed the exact same thing, right? And there was some other evidence that suggested that the agencies were using these funds to supplement their personnel budgets, which is not an appropriate use of the funds. And so that's why we kind of came up with those guidelines and got real strict on it. I would personally would like to see a prioritization, not just based on use, but particular wildlife. That's certainly one component. I'd like to see, you know, if you guys are butting up against Forest Service is butting up against you guys. There was no looking on the other side of the fence. All right, so we were asked to support building a water catchment on BLM land, and there was a one that was built 4 years prior on Forest Service land a half mile away. All right, so there was kind of like no landscape scale thinking. And so I guess I would like to see prioritization based on actual site visits to each one of these, prioritization based on use, prioritization based on the agency's ability to maintain these. Right? Are they just going to be allowed to go into disrepair again? And then we're going to be talking about doing maintenance again, you know, 20 years from now on these same ones. So that's all I have for this, at least for right now. But there were a lot of very specific issues that precipitated us coming up with those guidelines, and I don't think we should lose sight of those.
Just want to understand what the water sources are. Are all of these projects basically catching rainwater, storing it and metering it out? Are there existing springs or seeps or other surface waters that are currently used by wildlife that are part of this?
Yeah, they're all varied and the infrastructure at each one is also varied.
Okay.
Because some are rainwater catchments, some are associated with a Cabazon pipeline, which is multiple miles of pipe.
Okay.
Some of them are, associated with natural seeps and springs, that are piped.
Do you have an area inventory or a map of?
Yeah.
That shows where they are?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's something that we would like to put forward when we do the proposal is we can create a map of all of waters on the landscape and highlight the ones that we would like to prioritize for maintenance, including maintenance or inventory records recently, like we have those now for most of the waters in Cabazon, and we've been going out and doing maintenance on. I say we because I used to work at the Rio Puerto field office. Isidro, the field office biologist, has mostly been going out and doing as much as he can and has diligent notes on like, we need a float for this. We need a whole new infrastructure for this. This doesn't look like it's being utilized. This looks like it's being pawed at and it's empty. So we need to prioritize like getting this one up and running, et cetera. So we can bring utilization evidence, like the realistic ability to go back and maintain these and like the human element of like cost of investment. We can also bring like maintenance records and like data of like how we've invested in that and diligent lists of the of like the materials that we need and or the labor that we need to bring these up to speed. As Jimmy said, we could do all of that. It's just a lot of work. And so that's why I wanted to check in with y'all real early so that we could strategically plan if that's something that would be looked at as a positive project with like a positive impact, or if that's a different direction than what y'all would like to go in this year.
Yeah, what I was getting in, to me, it was not so much evidence of work to maintain it is looking at what the distribution is and trying to get a feel for whether the ones that were put in were done thoughtfully and they weren't arbitrary and integrating the rainwater catchments with whatever natural surface water is available.
Yeah.
Just kind of like a water plan for a big area. Now, I understand that it could be really labor intensive for you all, but if you're gonna do something like that, it seems you need to know what's there and what's needed before you start building stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of that information already exists with our annual inspection reports. I can't promise that we're getting out to every wildlife water on the landscape at every field office just because our budget changes, our field office folks change, but.
To me, it's flesh out a bigger picture of everything at every site.
Yeah.
So that we can all prioritize based on how long is this gonna last? Is it really gonna see something? Or are we just a shot in the dark? Because I've been all over the state, but I haven't been to all these places.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I've seen a lot of the old stuff that
Yeah.
was like just kind of put out there that doesn't really have much use and.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to make sure the money is spent lasts, the effect lasts as long and as broad.
Yeah.
On landscape.
That sounds good.
And that includes a lot of agency information, whether it's permittees, whether it's biology, whether it's.
Yeah.
Site visits,
Yeah,
as much as you can get in on that, more.
absolutely. And I will say that I think most of these are fenced with wildlife exclusion fences, so this is all wildlife responsibility. Our grazing folks aren't gonna put money into this because they have their own, they have their own
No.
constraints. Yeah. Yeah.
So like the prioritization, you know, I agree with Jimmy, that was, I mean, there was just not anything.
Yeah.
There was no maintenance data for anything.
Yeah.
There was zero, and that was. a huge issue. And, you know, we had no maintenance data for how many times fences were cut, how many fences were taken down by ungulates because maybe the enclosure wasn't
Sure.
big enough.
Yeah.
You know, and the smaller the enclosure, the more chance the fence is gonna be down.
Yeah.
But not only the prioritization for the maintenance data, but that's how you determine what kind of water catchment is gonna have longevity.
Yeah.
Without that data, you don't know.
Yeah.
So that's something that we don't know yet. But the quality of these water catchments, the technical quality, you know, the building quality is what
Yeah.
I mean. That's what's gonna give it longevity.
Yeah.
So you don't wanna just put a Band-Aid on something because you're gonna be there next year with the same Band-Aid. And
Yeah.
that was the thing, it was Band-Aid, Band-Aid. So some of these water catchments they need to be taken out and be just redone or taken out, one of the two,
Yeah.
and then start building like you're trying to do. I think that's a good approach to do the landscapes in a bigger environment.
Yeah.
And more comprehensive than when any water projects go in there or are rebuilt. They're rebuilt to a high standard. And that's gonna give us the longevity and the least amount of maintenance
Yeah.
that would go with it, but. Yeah,
And I think that's what, these proposals would be for, is like not just new floats on
Yeah.
existing structure. Maybe that's what a structure needs, and maybe it's an important one and we add it, but mostly I think these are looking at overhauling waters to be as resilient as possible and like suit the wildlife needs
Yeah.
out there. And that's why they would be expensive, and maybe like 10 of those is like outside the realm of our field office budget for that year because of the overhaul that would be required. And we have the inspection reports, we have the maintenance data, and we can compile all that. And I can't speak to the past, but I guess I just would be curious if it's something that y'all would like to see us try again, if that makes sense, in a different way.
one of the things is on fences of these units, and that has been a real big issue because. You know, the 3 or 4 strand wire or whatever you put around them, they work, but. And I understand they're wildlife fences. But a lot of these are in the rangeland also. And, but. We may not wanna say it, but there's conflict from cattle to these wildlife things. Which brings them into the picture. They're not just separate from the picture, and that's always been a catch for me. You
Yeah,
know, it's like, we went from having to do, 3 or 4 strand fences that have worked for hundreds of years. To doing expensive pipe fences for what? One reason, cattle. And that brings them completely in there, to causing us to go from, an affordable wire fence to an expensive pipe fence. And so now we got less projects that we can do. And that's always been a catch for me. It's like, we can get a bigger area with a 4 strand, and the ungulates generally can get out of those fairly easily. And, they keep cattle in branches and they keep cattle out of branches. I mean, they work, they just have to be the right size. And we can do bigger enclosures if we have if we can use fences like that. Other than that, you start getting into $200,000-300,000 for fences only.
Yeah,
So there's a lot in that aspect to me. It's, there's some responsibility from both range and wildlife.
yeah. I can't say that problem's ever gonna go away,
I know.
but I can say that, I mean, we're out there, I'm out there, you know, repairing fences and, we're doing the best we can and. You know, we understand that pipe fences are expensive, soda and, the other pipe fence that were, proposed to y'all last year, those are expensive fences for big areas and. That's not necessarily a project that we can, like, we don't know that we'll have funding for those types of projects year to year internally, and that's why we bring them to y'all.
It's
Yeah,
unfortunate because there is a lot of smaller projects that could be done. You know, other than those, the huge ones,
yeah,
you know, and. You know, we can only do so many big ones.
yeah. No, I got it,
mean,
yeah.
I'll be long gone before we get 4 or 5 of them.
Sure, yeah.
But I, you know, from my standpoint, being from. past career, part of that is it's one big collaboration. Big wildlife, and the teams that have that first time, a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
Projects that work for us with major wildlife, we have bought in from the sides.
Yeah.
But a lot of things happens, and stuff, you know, that can be. It's a disaster, that's why we don't find fences. Fight in environments. Exactly. But you're right, when we spent a ton of money to do something, and it could have been very much cheaper. If you could have got some buy-in.
Yeah,
And again, on your maintenance stuff too, I think we would be very receptive to something that's thought out.
Yeah.
Because I know exactly what happens in that stuff, and as far as maintenance, it's just maintenance and funding technicians to do maintenance, they're really getting out. If it's
Yeah.
thought out and we look at exactly what's needed. As maintenance is the thing, I don't personally want to put a lot of money in the project, there's not some mechanism that we're gonna see that need to be.
yeah,
And that happened a lot.
yeah. I will say, in that photo I showed y'all, like, there's a range tech in there helping
Yeah.
us with the wildlife fronts, and so we do a lot of collaboration now.
That's
and-
good to see, because that didn't always happen. I
Yeah.
can remember projects where wildlife folks put in a project and range side didn't even know about it. There wasn't a lot of communication back then,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
that hopefully getting better.
yeah, I would say so. I work closely with our range folks, and I know our wildlife pilots do too
Okay,
now.
good.
Yep.
All right. Do we have any more questions or comments for Stephanie? If not, we can get to kind of the out year projects and kind of the more nitty gritty on what you guys might want to see a little bit later today. And we do have a vet pro who's going to give a presentation from the Forest Service side. Yep.
That's what I know.
Yes, so I'm Yvette Perot, I'm out of the regional office with the Forest Service. I just want to give you guys kind of an example project of how your money has gone into, you know, a bigger project. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of explain was one of our planning, and I guess I need to put a caveat, like everything we're going to talk about today as far as funding, availability, and the way we were doing things was a 3-month ago view. I have no kind of, you know, everything's in chaos for us right now, you know, admittedly, and so I really don't know exactly how things are going to go in the future. But I'm just gonna, you know, show this really good example from, you know, the last couple of years. For one of the planning tools that we have in the Forest Service is called the Watershed Restoration Condition Classification. And so I forget how often they're supposed to do them, but every 10 years or so, the hydrologist group, the watershed groups go through and do ratings on all our watersheds, the six code watersheds, and they use these 12 different condition indicators, you know, to kind of give an overall, you know, what's the health of the watershed. And so the map kind of shows our region, you know, green is functioning properly, yellow is functioning at risk, and then the red means that it's impaired. function. And that's due to many things, water quality has to do with, different things like, is it 303 listed for different impairments like aluminum or some other thing like that. Water quantity has something gone in, is all the water getting diverted? Aquatic habitat, riparian areas, aquatic biota, that's really based on, are the native species that are supposed to be in there, roads and trails, like I said, it's going all the way up to the ridge tops, soils. A lot of these are fire affected area, fire regime. So they'll look at the fire models and it's like, is this whole area in a high wildfire risk? And it's all pretty broad brush stuff, but it gives us a good, idea of, what are the conditions of these watersheds, rangeland, terrestrial invasive species, and then forest health is just kind of, is there, say, a big bug kill, that's in the watershed, which also adds into the fire regime and that type of thing. And so go ahead. So a few of these watersheds are selected by each forest for different reasons. Sometimes it's opportunistic just because there's already work being done, and sometimes there's specific reasons why they want to concentrate on these watersheds. And they'll prepare what's called a watershed restoration action plan. And it takes into account what are the projects that would need to be done in that watershed to move it up in classification. So say if it's functioning at risk, what would it take to get it into and functioning properly? And so the project I wanted to kind of highlight was the watershed restoration action plan for Hilita Creek. And the Willow Creek project was within that watershed. And within that, and that's part of the big, we call them RAPs. And within that RAP, the projects that were identified included road decommissioning, road improvements, to help, keep sediment from getting into the streams, the Willow Creek restoration, which was the habitat action plan. And going back a little bit, this whole watershed was affected both by the Bear Fire and the Whitewater Baldy Fire. So that was, a big reason that this watershed was prioritized because of all that fire impacts. And so, sorry, going back to the list, Hilita Creek was identified, meadow enhancement, riparian enclosure, all these things were identified as, what's it going to take to move this watershed back to a functioning condition. And the figure on the right kind of shows what was not functioning well. So all the yellows, those were kind of medium risk, like the watershed was listed for aluminum and sediment and temperature in the different streams. And so that's why aquatic habitat and water quality came back, at the time, aquatic biological, there were non-native species in there at the time, certain things like that. Forest cover, since the whole thing was burned over, it's not functioning as well. But this was just kind of to explain. So go ahead. So this, these are pictures from the Whitewater or from the Willow Creek restoration that was completed last year with habitat enhancements money, and they went in and did a lot of things to help stabilize the banks, improve riparian vegetation. One of the things that happens a lot after fires is you lose all your pool habitat. It becomes kind of a big, long, shallow run, and it widens out. And so they went in and created pool habitat that is sustaining, that helps move that water through there and creates pool habitat. And this is all a Gila trout fishable area. They also rerouted some of the stream through a wetland. And so there was kind of some more wetlands that were created. And so it really turned out nicely. Go ahead. And I just want to kind of show how this lies on how the different funding has been done. So this is where Willow Creek restoration was done. And then this yellow is all the Helita Creek watershed. The other funding that has gone into this is we got Inflation Reduction Act funding through the Forest Service and put that into an agreement with Trout Unlimited. And so they're partnering with us and hired a contractor to do sorry, I'm all backwards here. Restoration action planning for Helita Creek. And so we just got the design phase for that. We're hoping right now that money is tied up. We did have the money there, so we're hoping that they'll let us spend it because we did have money allocated to complete that restoration for all of Helita Creek. Hopefully this year, we'll see what happens with that. In addition, that money already paid for a little chunk of Willow Creek up above where the Habitat Stamp Project was. So that they did a little restoration in there just to complete that watershed. And then through our partners, this is private land right here. They were able to get money from the New Mexico River Stewardship and other funds to do some work in the private land so that whole stream is being worked on. And then another part of this is Little Turkey Creek, which is all in the wilderness. Jeff, TU, and Jim Brooks and that group has been working. They got 2 different river stewardship grants and some other funds as well to do like Z-dike type structures, hand structures, all within Little Turkey Creek.
It's all wilderness.
Because it's all wilderness, the wilderness boundary. Can't really see it here, but it's right here. And so showing, there's been lots of partners, trying to accomplish the different work in this area. Another little piece of that, Wilderness Alliance has gone in and done some different noxious weed control projects in the watershed. And so just kind of showing how, when we've got it well planned and well coordinated, this is a really good example of, having that, Willow Creek was a big project in itself, but, that was just a piece of, really trying to improve that whole watershed to a functioning state. So any questions about that? Yeah, it's great. And I'm really hoping that we can, if for some reason we don't get the Inflation Reduction funds turned back on, we may be coming here to try to get that one. It's design ready, it's NEPA ready, it's ready to go. We're just waiting for them to turn the money back on. Go ahead. Just wanted to kind of show, these are the different watershed restoration action plans that are already in place. And so we went out with Caitlin and Jennifer a couple weeks ago down in this outlet Center Fire Creek landscape and looked at all the different projects that are covered in this Luna landscape. It's both a wrap and then also a big landscape planning. There's different types of thinning, burning, stream restoration, road work. All these things are kind of all packaged up as opportunities that might be, brought, some piece of that might be brought to the Habitats Committee as an option, and I'm hoping that when the forests bring it forward that they'll help explain, how it fits into this bigger landscape of projects. But like I said, all the forests have some completed wraps, and depending on personnel, some have more active watershed programs than others, but that was one of the, with the Inflation Reduction Act, funding, that was one of the requirements. Was that those funds had to be spent in areas with an active RAP. And so that gave us a good opportunity, to get those things planned. Just wanted to show some of the other planning areas, this is how things were kind of being planned out, so. The Forest Service, one of our big priorities are these wildfire crisis landscapes. And a lot of funds and priority and are being put towards those. And so a lot of them will be NEPA ready, for things like prescribed burning and thinning and that type of things. And so that's probably, an opportunity that we'll be working with Game and Fish to come up with projects that benefit wildlife within those type of landscapes. And so these ones in the black are kind of the super high priority one. That's the Enchanted Circle wildfire crisis strategy. And then these other ones that are highlighted have some different, I don't completely understand all the different, they're all high priority, high risk fire sheds, so that they have some special status where if we get money for thinning and burning and stuff, a lot of it is going to be concentrated in those highlighted areas. Luckily for us, it's like a whole bunch of our landscape is identified in those areas. And so it just makes it easier for us to get priority projects in there. Go ahead. Also just wanted to show, these are some of these are called collaborative forest landscape restoration areas. And so there's one here in Blue Water and there's several up. This is the Rio Chama CFLRP. And these are other areas that are kind of landscape restoration, working with the local communities, that they've identified projects and that they come out with different opportunities for work to be done, mostly thinning and burning, but every once in a while, but in this Rio Chama, they're going to be working on El Rito Creek, and that was part of also Chihuahueños and San Antonio creeks as well, or part of that bigger landscape. Go ahead. And then these are just kind of some of the we've been trying to do some of these big landscape NEPAs that cover a variety of projects, thinning, burning, some red watershed work and that type of stuff. And so they're all NEPA cleared. Game and Fish partnered with us to help pay for the Northern New Mexico riparian NEPA, which covers the Cibola, Santa Fe, and Carson. And so basically any kind of watershed work, riparian work in those forests, all sorts of categories of that can be covered under that NEPA. And so that's really made the process for getting projects pushed forward in those easier. I think we're still in objections on the South Sacramento project, but I'm hoping that'll get signed, which is on the Lincoln, which will provide a lot of areas for thinning and burning.
When you bet that one was highly funded by Game and Fish.
Yeah, that was
part as well.
That one's has been very patiently. The Luna landscape, which we visited a couple weeks ago, that's all a big landscape NEPA covered area. The Blackfire restoration is down in the Gila, the whole Black Range, which was basically all burned in the Blackfire 3 years ago. That NEPA they covered all the watershed. They're doing wraps for every watershed within that range of that fire. The activities that were kind of identified within those wraps are going to be covered in this Blackfire restoration NEPA, which hopefully will be done by the end of the year. And then the Zuni Mountain, that whole CFLRP area is cleared. And so just kind of wanted to show, this is kind of how we're working, to bring projects together and work with Game and Fish and, identify little pieces of these landscapes that could make, a good HSP proposal, and then try to explain how that they fit all together within those larger planning areas.
There's some good projects, Black Fire and everything,
Yeah,
definitely.
there's gonna be a lot of work, a lot of good stuff for, and hopefully we'll get some moisture on it.
Mhm.
So I think I had one more.
Let's see. Yep.
Oh, this was just a similar to Stephanie, just a concept project that, we can talk about later. But wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, I met with all the forests, to kind of figure out, what projects they think they're gonna bring forward this year, and I think a lot of it's still in flux. Everybody's trying to figure out what direction it is up, but one of them, which is a little bit different, is, that the CBLA wanted some feedback on was, this is on Mountain Air District, and they were thinking, they've got a whole batch of springs out there that are in need of protection and restoration, and wanting to kind of see, how the CAC would receive, a batch project like that covers, small projects within a larger landscape. And so we can talk about this one more later, but that's all right, that. So, any questions for me?
If I got just one question, can you kind of give me an overview of how the Forest Service now prepares projects to bring to this committee? Is it handled through each forest that funnels them? How is that working? Because I know it's changed a lot, so.
It's kind of organic, it's basically, I think the forests and the regional and Santa Fe game and fish folks, kind of toss ideas back and forth at the beginning. And sometimes it'll be, the forest coming up with, hey, this is something that we'd like to do, or a priority from game and fish. And then, we kind of get together and see what could be, ripe with NEPA, how does it fit into our planning, some of them are not gonna be, some of them are gonna be smaller projects that maybe not, are, very specialized for a small purpose, and some of these larger landscape, hey, we think that we've got this larger landscape that we're prioritizing, with this part of that landscape project make a good habitat stamp project. And so that it's just been kind of organic conversations between game and fish and the forests at this point. And trying to get, making sure that the forest leadership is supportive of moving forward on.
Because I know that was one problem that happened for a while when the forest leadership wasn't involved in those decisions as they needed to be. Has that gotten better?
Yes, and I think, since the projects are generally bigger scale projects.
That would help, yeah.
That-
I think
that-
before we had some centralized stuff through some of the wildlife programs that funnel those up, and they weren't really well coordinated with other functions and with leadership and
Yeah,
any of that, so.
and I think that's part of kind of the conversations, is making sure that, at some point very early in the conversations, is this something that the leadership is supportive on, and getting them to sign off on it prior to bringing it to you.
On your wraps, how often do you do those? I know I've heard that term for years, but once you've done them, how long are those valid for? You visiting? them?
They're kind of living documents in a way, but normally, like, when you have that list of essential projects identified, if you get them all done or some major portion of them done, and you feel that the watershed has, gone to its goal condition, you'll close that wrap and move on to a new area. Or if, say you've got to change conditions, say, a big fire comes through, or something has changed, we may have to go through and say, oh, we need to do this now. And so they'll kind of reopen the wrap and redraft it. But I think they're constantly, looking at them, but the evaluations are only done every 5 to 10 years, depending on, kind of our staff level.
So when we're looking at springs, things to this nature out in Mountain Air area, that's pretty much rangeland as well, correct? And
Yes.
wildlife, so it's both. Is both rangeland and wildlife funding available?
I think this one is really in a conceptual phase still, so I think that they were really kind of like,
Are you guys wanting to work with
I think,
Rangeland
Oh.
and permittees and? things
definitely.
Here together, since it's kind of a mingled thing.
yes. Yeah, I think that's key for all our projects, for sure.
I think so.
And the other thing Andrea wanted me to kind of inquire was, I know that Mountain Air is doing a lot of maintenance on their wildlife waters. And wanted to know if she should come to you guys kind of with a report out, just to
We ain't heard anything.
kind of show you guys what's being done out there. And so that's something we
Yeah.
could probably arrange for.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Anything else from the group? Okay, well, thanks Yvette, thanks Stephanie for presenting today. We have a programmed break here for a few minutes, like 10-15 minutes, so folks can use restrooms, get some water, and then we'll get into a subcommittee update if that sounds good. So right now, we've got 2:15, so let's say 2:30. Does that sound good to start things back up? Cool. All right.
Where we.
Like a temporary positions.
Pretty straight, so that's the fun.
But this is doing this.
Oh, did you, I would have some wine. Okay, I'm going out with them sometime in April. Yeah, is that Mills coming in? You say it would be in an email chain about. And then these. That's what. But I'm already talking with the. Whatever their name is, who's over that kind of area, the kind of guys, wrestlings, which is part of the about Mills Kingdom, so. Their role and is really to work in conjunction. But, you know, they're in contact with them and they're making it happen. Playing field days with Gary. Don't you ever help out on one situation? You know, like it's ringing after we have been in. You know, and then things like when they get eggs and then they get the result, you know.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and get going again here. So for our next agenda item, we have an update from a subcommittee that was created the last time that this committee met. The committee was tasked with basically starting to look at some additional information that might be beneficial to include with project proposals moving forward, specific to range utilization. So thinking about the multiple use landscape, you know, we've got wildlife, we've got fuels, you know, so timber and stuff, we've got mineral extraction, we've got oil and gas, and then we've got grazing as some of those things. And so really just trying to dive down into some of that information about grazing that might be helpful in evaluating some of these projects moving forward. And just to give a little bit of a background on why that subcommittee was created. So you all, you know, in order for you all to communicate and converse and act and vote on things, we have to have a quorum of people in an open public meeting. Whenever there's a subject matter that needs some of you to kind of dive in and research some stuff and come back to the committee with a recommendation, you can create a subcommittee, as was done in this case. However, that subcommittee can only communicate within themselves. They can't, while they're researching stuff, contact you all about their findings and get your input until we get back to an open public meeting. And so right now where we're at is the subcommittee is ready to kind of give a little bit of a status update and talk about what their findings have been, get some initial input from you all and think about next steps. Is that about fair? Does that seem about right? Okay, so from here, for those online, just be patient for a minute and I'll get a copy of this document shared on the screen so you can see it. For other folks that are in attendance, we did print it out. And so Kaylin, if you don't mind maybe passing it out to other CAC members. We have kind of a draft version of what some of those recommendations are starting to shape up as. And so now I'll go ahead and turn it over to that subcommittee. And so you guys can kind of run with it however you see fit. It's your meeting.
Well, basically, we came. Projects that have the highest chance of success. In general, we kind of look to exist and have an exploration protocol for what we could find on the internet. I mean, it's a gauntlet of directions. But anyway, so, or the protocol for degraded rangeland and to come up with these recommendations. Included with the subcommittee recommendations, we had those documents that we were looking at. But what we'll do is, we'll get the full committee, Daniel will send them out to the full committee so you guys can take a glance at them and stuff like that. But I'll just kind of tell you what they are real quick. The first one was the New Mexico Standards for Public Land Health and Guidelines for Livestock Grazing Management, it was adopted by the Department of Interior in 2001 regarding, BLM lands in New Mexico. Even though the BLM has a mission to maintain BLM lands for degradation in New Mexico, or New Mexico felt the need to clarify it with this agreement. And that's what we got out of it. The purpose of that decision is to adopt these standards for public land health and guidelines for livestock grazing management for New Mexico, and to approve the Bureau of Land Management decisions, which would amend the land use plans, the resource management plans, which I couldn't find exactly. I mean, they were found bits and pieces of things, but it was hard to relate it to it. So we pretty much just looked at this other document. And then also we'll get to you guys it's a sample of the USFS 2024 annual operating instructions, which is basically an allotment agreement. What kind of teeth that agreement has, I have no knowledge, but hopefully in time the subcommittee can maybe have a meeting with a couple of the rangeland biologists and stuff, and maybe get pick their brains and listen to what they have to say as well. But this information on this OAI is just applicable to the allotment that it is, but it's a good example of general protocol. They say it was that the AOI is not an officially executed agreement. It's just it's the blueprint. Nobody signed it yet or anything to that. It's a pretty interesting document. It shows the USFS is fairly comprehensive in its permittee agreement for maintaining allotment habitat.
I thought the grazing plans had to be some, the ones I looked up on the Forest Service website, been signed by the permittees.
No, these ones weren't. They were signed by the habitat range.
The range
guy
person,
but not the lessee yet.
Yeah, ours used to be, they used to be called annual operating plans, and they were changed to annual operating instructions. And within that.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
So then those were signed by the permittee. We'd sit down with the permittee, we'd work through what we're gonna do and what the rotation was, what kind of improvements, what they were gonna maintain. So it's just that annual, this is the plan for this year, what they are.
We found them to be very comprehensive.
They generally are.
And bottom line, it was a good thing. You just don't know where it goes from there.
There's not as much teeth in them as you would want.
Right.
I mean, they are basically in agreement, this is what we're gonna do.
Right.
To be able to do so, it takes permit action, which is very complicated.
Right, and it doesn't have a direction to go if things go astray.
Right.
There's no direction for it, so it's not necessarily a comprehensive contract per se.
enforcement is weak.
Yeah, because the contract is gonna state.
It's based on the permit itself.
Yes. Yeah, and they're all different, yeah. You can pull different ones up, but I just pulled this one out because it was an area that I knew, so. He'll get you that, and then I also just, pulled off a statement off the USFS website, and I know I don't have that statement here. I should have printed it all out myself, at least for me to have a copy. I don't have a copy, so we'll have to the statement says a lot. It states that what the USF strives that they'll do or strives to do. And it's exactly what the public expects from the USFS and the rangeland management specialist. I mean, it's exactly what Well, it's exactly what the USF wants to tell the public. But is that what happens or not? It is, and it isn't. I mean, we all know the fluctuations of them, so. But what we know though is the USFS and BLM, they want to maintain the landscape at a minimum standard always. That's the goal, you know? No matter who's on it, whether it be a permittee or a public or any other entity that uses our public lands, you know, so nobody's supposed to get away with degrading the land. That's the bottom line. But we're not here to dictate what they, you know, to make them adhere to them or anything like that. So we got these recommendations from there. We tried to be, you know, just focused on basic information that we might need for it, you know, to have a proposed project, the highest amount of success for it, you know. So anyway, let me just go through these real quick. The first one is the project must contain specific details that clearly define any prior and future mitigation that addresses the project degradation. And then number 2 is provide details of prior funding for the degraded habitat restoration. And then if there were no funds implemented by the range biologist or from permitting, please explain why. Provide what the permitted stocking rate and pasture rotation on the degraded area of the allotment has been. And then is there any livestock presently on the allotment or degraded area? If so, provide all pertinent information. Number 4 was provide the adapted management plan that was implemented in the effort to contain the degradation. If there were no mitigation efforts, please explain why. It's kind of a, we gotta remember, all of these are just, it's the same thing, you know. Would we be like adhering to it for every project? No, every project's gonna be different. There's a lot of different issues and nothing's like we don't want to stop or stifle any project coming. We just need the information. That's all. And then number 5 was provide any future adapted management plans to maintain future grazing and vegetation restoration of the degraded area so that the rangeland habitat can function properly and be used by local wildlife. And then also that information should include, but not limited to, what livestock will be permitted on the degraded allotment in terms of stocking rate, pasture rotation, and who will be responsible for monitoring. You know, with that one particular there, I know I'm fairly sure, I'm not, let me back. I don't know for sure about anything really on the monitoring part of it. But I think the permittees are generally given that range, which is almost just a deferred issue from, you know, because the range biologist is actually person who's responsible, not the permittee. Even though the permittee is monitoring it, so they should have a pretty close relationship. And we'll tell you how we used to do. Basically, we did monitor, either myself or a range technician. Permittee was usually with us if they chose to. But I've been hearing a lot from other range folks now that they're with staffing levels, that they're getting permittees to do some of their own monitoring. Yeah. Which may work in certain circumstances, but others, it's like you're policing yourself. Yeah. So right, that's. Well, and then you, I mean, how far does it go at that point? Is the project like, you know, is it completely degraded watershed area to the little riparian area? And you know, it's important, you know, and if it gets to the point where it's just dust out there, well, we're this far past minimum, you know, which is important for restoration and for habitat stamp funds to be able to bring it back. I mean, it's good information to know. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So Oh, on the monitoring, yeah, that USFS, the AOI, it literally states on there that it's the permittee that's doing the monitoring.
See, that's been a shift. What used to be.
Yeah. So, number 6, are there any agreements to help protect and monitor fences and vegetative restoration? And if so, provide details of a monitoring plan. Plan should include but not limited to adequate inspections and who is responsible for inspections. Inspections should include photo verification of restoration progress and a detailed description of restoration photos. Having some kind of agreement for restoration and the monitoring process will tend to provide a higher degree of restoration success benefiting all vested parties, which would be, for the most part, anybody that would use that particular land. Because really there's very little difference in a lot of range land and a lot of wildlife land. It's almost one and the same. So it's hard to distinguish between the two. Number 7 was riparian areas that are dependent on upland watershed to maintain its viability must include a mitigation plan for both the watershed and the riparian area. Then the next part of that is the exception kind of. Some riparian areas may be able to be fenced without a watershed plan as long as the amount of fenced area encompasses enough habitat to sustain its viability. Provide all details justifying the amount of habitat to be encompassed. You know, we get this, we've done this on a few projects recently over the last 3 or 4 years where the area of the riparian area was fenced out big enough so that it could maintain its own viability. Where some riparian areas and some springs, which came up on the other thing, they can't maintain their own viability without the watershed that feeds them. And so it becomes 2-part in that process. You know, we need to know both information of what's going on in order to save that spring. But we can work with in a lot of directions and there, I hope that's what we're getting to here. And then provide the comprehensive itemized use of the funds. And then number 9 was project details should define direct benefits to the public, permittee, and wildlife. Then the last thing was just a little citizen advisory committee recommendation. It is recommended that the full CAC explore and develop respectful relationships with USFS and BLM rangeland biologists and to encourage rangeland biologists to be active partners with the New Mexico Game and Fish Habitat Stamp Program and protecting range habitat for the public, permittees, and wildlife. And with that, discussions, or the other members there, if they want to say anything.
And I'd also just offer up, so this is an open discussion for the full CAC right now. We do have some representatives from the BLM and Forest Service, so if you all would like to ask them any questions or input, that's up to you all. This is your discussion, and also if you'd like to hear from anyone else who's here, it's your discretion.
Yeah,
So
what I would like to hear is come back in committee and have some other folks, and then we can schedule a meeting, you know, in a month or 2, and then come back with maybe any changes or anything to that nature that we might be able to see, but we won't know those changes because if you don't tell us now or at the next meeting, and then we would try to incorporate them right there, and then maybe we could adopt them, you know, go to adopt them.
Kind of a question, because I recall the origin of the subcommittee was that we were concerned that a lot of the proposals that we're looking at involve grazings and its effect on the different areas. And we didn't have any information as to whether the grazing permittees were involved in the origin, preparation, consideration of the projects whatsoever. And so using the theory that if you put some categories in the request for proposal, that they'll be addressed. And that's what we were trying to move toward, is to ensure that the a Forest Service or BLM staff who were proposing that they'd actually talked to the permittees and they'd looked at the effect of what the grazing was doing and involved the permittees somehow and actively in the development of the proposal and getting some assurance that if it were funded, the permittees would actually support it. So that's my understanding.
Which is why we're trying to get the rangeland biologist to be part of the process, because he's the liaison for that permittee. So really the permittee for CAC purposes, in my opinion, we're just talking about fleet, is immaterial. You know, it's rangeland biologist that's their liaison, and that's who the spokesperson is for the permittee. So we would hope that looking at this, they can say, well, just need to get this information, and then then they would talk to the permittee, and hopefully they could be part of the presentation, you know. We really would love to have them as part of our active partners, is what I was what we came up with.
I can speak for the Hamas, different Hamas Ranger districts. In my experience over about 20 years, the range specialists don't have a whole lot of influence on what the permittees do. They basically regard their permits as a property right, and they've been doing that. Their fathers have been doing that, and it's something that they've been doing forever. And we conservationists who are seeing degradation and we start complaining are just an annoyance.
Well,
And so
I agree. I agree. But the thing is all we can do is go by what protocol is for what we want.
right, but if you put it all on the range specialist who may not even exist because there's huge turnover in them. Somehow there has to be some assurance that whatever is done is going to work and that the permittees are going to support it. However, like if we're gonna build a fence, I'd like assurances that the permittees aren't gonna cut it at some time.
Well, that's the whole object of the CAC, and
You know,
if they don't give you the information you want, then
don't fund
there's
it.
a less likely that it will get passed.
Yeah, but that's what I would see in proposals. Due diligence on the part.
Yeah, we need to be able to see that those contacts and that coordination has been made. They may not always agree with it, but I think we've had projects passed where permittees actually participate.
And there's
That does happen.
And that's fine.
You got involved, you gotta talk to them.
And there's in the Amos district, there's actually some buy-in by some of the permittees. They're putting drinkers up in the islands to keep the cattle out from the Rio Cebolla and stomping all over Rio Grande Petroid habitat.
Right, well, actually, from what I was researching, that is actually a mechanism. You know, if the cattle are in certain areas and they need to spread them out, they need to come up with a way, whether it's salt licks or other water sources. I believe that's what we were coming up with. The thing is I think the recommendations, you know, if we can refine them, whatever, if there's any refining, it would be, is it possible to, it's not possible to submit stuff. See, it's hard to get, input from the full CAC, you know, in a fashion that works in a way, because it's like, okay, we're gonna leave here, we know what we're looking at, but how do we? They don't have
Well,
time to look at anything.
I think that's, for you all to kind of chew on and discuss, and Jimmy's got his hand up too. I think just hearing from everyone and just talking it through as a group would probably be the best that we could really do. But yeah, Jimmy, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so, I think some of this was precipitated by some of the projects we were getting where restoration projects, and the restoration was needed because the habitat was degraded because of improper livestock management. And what we wanted to see, and when we asked questions to the biologists, they said, well, the range folks aren't going to pitch in anything. They're not going to help. They see this as a wildlife problem. But yeah, the restoration is a wildlife problem because we want to restore it for wildlife. but the problem was caused by livestock grazing. And so what we wanted to see was what were the efforts by the range program to deal with this? What are the efforts going to be moving forward? And this is going to help us prioritize projects. If it's caused by cattle grazing, it's not going to be fenced, it's not going to be arrested. It's just going to be business as usual after we spend a bunch of money, then I personally am going to prioritize that project down at the bottom of my list. So it was really just a way for us to figure out how we were going to prioritize projects based on what we thought some of the constraints would be in terms of, the successful restoration of a particular area. Both in terms of moving forward, but in terms of also like removing the cause or mitigating the cause of the degradation in the first place.
Umbrella precipitated by life degradation versus which ones do you feel precipitated by, just so that I understand where the line is, so that I can understand that better.
Well, I think anytime you're looking at some kind of a recurrent exposure, those are gonna be highly impacted by grazing, and probably the reason why we're looking at explosive in the first place.
Okay.
Right, those, and then probably anything to do with riparian and whether an upland watershed is probably not severe, but fisheries things, all of them are impacted by grazing. Because all of the land is an allotment. It is, for the most part, most of it's graze. There's very few places that aren't. Right, so yeah.
The most projects.
Yeah,
Okay, riparian.
It's got green grass.
Okay.
Yeah, water grass. Probably.
Okay.
Yeah, and really, a lot of the springs, it's like. I recall going through with Dave Heft on looking at some of the springs that were, fenced before, and they were just a spring, postage stamp. It didn't do anything, so all of that money was, I mean, it might have helped a little bit, but it was still dirt, in the enclosures. So it was more than what that spring was, or that riparian area to deal with. And it's almost always due to the minimum standards not being adhered to.
Well, you gotta protect the watershed where the infiltration occurs that powers the spring.
Yeah, that too. To me, some of the keys from the agency standpoint, South Forest is to ensure that those projects have been carried through all of those functions. And that's where we got into trouble years ago, was they were elevating to maybe just the wildlife monitors. The range wasn't involved, and wasn't involved, fire wasn't involved. I think you can resolve that, not then by having leaders get involved with that stuff. You start facing all your, landscape projects, just basic coordination.
Can I make a point of clarification with that? And I don't want to butt in.
It's up, no, wait, you're talking one for you.
But in environmental analysis, which most projects need, is encompassing, and usually before you get your interdisciplinary team of range, wildlife, hydrologists, forestry, geology, every cultural specialist involved in analyzing the potential environmental impact of the project, you have to make sure that leadership supports the investment of all of those labor hours into doing that analysis, which can take months. And so it's not that range isn't involved, they're actually deeply involved in putting a lot of labor into doing the environmental analysis towards that project. And they're having those proactive conversations with the permittees throughout the life of the project. So I think, I don't know if that happened historically, I can't speak to that, but in recent history, as far as EAs have been going on, it's happening incomprehensibly. I know I can only speak for my own experience, but for the Soda Springs fence, that was coordinated a lot with our rangeland management specialist partners.
I think some of the issues came a lot where a lot of the small projects were just done under CDs.
Mm,
So they weren't necessarily involved with those interdisciplinary teams to the degree of such a large number.
okay,
If we get back to the more larger landscape project, yes, we should have all that collaboration.
Yeah, we had several fencing proposals last time that were small, and I suspect they.
If it was just a CE, then was that coordination really done or not?
Yeah, and it's like, well, why are we doing just that little bit?
The watershed around them is duped, there, and so you wanna protect them? You're not doing anything. I mean, it goes to a much bigger problem, and that would. The idea that the agency is looking at the bigger problem would give weight to that proposal being approved. But it appears that nobody's paying attention to the rest of the picture. And I'm being very candid for years and years of being out in the forest, and I can go with lots of examples, but there's places that even when, it hasn't rained for 25, we know that, but there's places that cattle should have been pulled off 2 years ago that still have cattle. Okay, so there's a disconnect there. And the Forest Services or the BLM are not doing their job, or whoever in charge of that would be the range person to tell that permittee to get us cattle. And if you want to have a habitat project in that area, forget it. And that's where I go to. Why even promote those when you can't look at the big picture?
Yeah, the
So-
first, that AOI, it states in it that if there's no funding and things to that nature to address the degradation, then maybe we need to pull the cattle off. I mean, the area for now, until, cause if there's no money, you're gonna just keep letting the cattle run through it, or do you pull the cattle out? And we don't have that information ever either. It's, I think it was one of your projects in the Rio Puerco last year that had the spring that we wanted to fence, but the outside of it was dirt also, that was a classic example, which was good, appreciate that, and it's important though, if the cattle aren't even gonna get off of it and it's just dirt, then yeah, the project doesn't have any chance at all.
And I'm not just picking on any individual, but agency-wide, there's a lot of issues out there that are within those agencies, but our job is to make sure that these funds are put in the right place. And it looks like that you're putting a patch on a tire that's already bald.
Right.
The money's not gonna go there, not if I'm there. Just to be perfectly candid.
But there's a lot of projects that do come. I mean, it's not
Yeah,
all bad.
The more information we have, the more we can work with to make it informed decision on that. So.
Yeah, we fenced out the Finchon.
Oh, it's just been fun.
Yeah, that was one that was be able to maintain. What's that other one? That was the other big one.
Stewart Meadows?
Yeah.
That one's big.
Meadows.
Mhm.
That was a big one, and that was fencing out the whole riparian areas, and it's able to take care of itself, so. The questions did come up then, though. What's going on outside of the fence? Are the cattle still there? Or anything to that nature? You get up into like the Vital projects that we were doing in there, lots and lots of money, lots of groups, everything. The biggest issue was the cattle never once was rested off of any of that property. But yet we put millions of dollars, with not HSP, but everybody, put money in there. But the cattle wasn't ever rested at all. And it still went down, the project, yes, even though. But we've been told that it will be monitored and things to that nature, but I'm kind of up in I don't know where the monitoring goes with that, you know, if it's ever gonna get there, or do we not know until it's degraded again?
Well, one of the things we monitor every year, but if you don't take any of the information and implement changes in it, it isn't really valued. And a lot of your AOIs will say, oh, you're monitoring your certain use levels, but what if you don't hit that use level? There's gonna be some change in stockings, or some change in rotation. That's the piece that you're probably not gonna see. That AOI is gonna tell you what's gonna.
I have it might be a simple proposal that would get to the heart of this. A statement in the RFP that says something like, proposals for projects that involve riparian areas, or it could be areas in which cattle grazing is a significant issue, will be prioritized if there is evidence in the proposal of the active support and participation of the grazing permittees. Just put that in. It's what we're gonna, it's gonna be an evaluation thing. You put in something that, like that in a proposal, in my experience, that's what you're gonna see back in, and what the submissions are.
You can put the buy in.
No. Okay.
Chances that slots are very limited if you don't have that. Just gonna be getting your head against the wall.
And we don't have to worry about all of these details because, you know, it's in the grazing plans and all of that. Just say, if that's an issue, proof permittees are active partners in mitigating it, if you want this proposal to be ranked highly and not on the bottom.
We don't want.
That's up to the biologists to bring to us. I don't permit it.
It's up to the agency to put together a plan that
Yeah.
demonstrates that this is a place we want to put some money.
We're not trying to send a message
Yeah.
to say, get rid of all the cattle.
No, I'm sorry,
We're trying
not.
to say, work with us on this project.
And that's where
Be it a buffer area around there that protects that riparian, or be it.
And a range staff, and sitting in that range staff position, you're gonna be able to tell that about, these are the areas that we can probably do some work in, and these are areas we probably can't. Because of conflicts, litigation can be a lot of stuff. I think we.
This is a one-time deal. People ask, apply to get money, we get all the paperwork we want. Next year, we don't have any guarantee that they actually did what they're signing on to. The permit doesn't mean not to do it.
That's out of our hands.
Yeah, the permit is like, we're not. We don't know.
Make sure.
But I talked to several communities about this. Basically, what they tell me is it's a God-given right to take it. However, we are the only ones who care about them. So I think if you get there by it, however, said it just needed to get them to get to them. And get them, because somebody cares enough to submit the proposal to patch. And they need to get the permittee on board.
And it's easy to sign off though, if you're a permittee.
Well, but then you're asking for monitoring and it's the grazing specialist who has to do the monitoring, and because there aren't enough of them. And they're busy with other stuff, they're delegating it to the permittees, so it's kind of toothless. I think the biggest, and the famous, in my experience, most of the monitoring of riparian areas was done by anglers who run the cows and then report back to us, and we call the ranger.
That's why I'm on this committee, is because I've been in the field all my life. And I just, the degradation that was out there was pretty big. You know, I've seen a lot, and I wanted to know why, you know. It was also with the water catchments. I wanted to know why they weren't there. I've really pretty much got all my answers. I've learned a lot, and I think just asking for pertinent information is enough for the CAC to be able to decide whether or not, you know, it's the best use of public funds.
Yeah, that's the most really.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And I've had off the record, staff tell me that one problem with enforcement is that if, they tell the permittee something they don't want to hear. And say they're going to enforce it, they just get on the phone and call the congressman, who calls the secretary of agriculture, who comes back down on. The forest supervisor who comes back down.
Those are all things out of our control, probably our reach, but we just wanna make an informed decision with the best information possible. Especially with, and I hate to say it, but especially when we see that there's one common denominator in this problem, and it's cattle. Or it could be oil and gas, or it could be anything else. It could be public that puts a footprint on the ground. But we need to know more about how to, I mean, this could all apply to the oil and gas stuff, to the San Juan Basin. And I know they do that. You don't cite this well here because there's water here, that kind of stuff, but
You know, we just wanted to make fair recommendations for information. You know, didn't want to get after anybody. We just wanted to be able to ask for information that should be readily available. If it's not, it's nothing we can do. I don't think the CAC wants to try to enforce or do anything of that nature. It's just strictly recommendations for information in a fair manner to where we're not pushing a range biologist or a wildlife biologist or a permittee for that fact. But it's the range biologist, I mean, they'll get the projects together, they'll put as much information, and at least if this, we can get recommendations into our guidance document, our CAC guidance document. That gives future CAC members the opportunity to go, oh, I should be asking questions like these, maybe, you know, just anything about enforcement. It's not about that. It's about how do we get the best project for our money.
So I think you've done a good job. You made your job. You got way more than we want to put in an RFP, but that's the background.
Well, yeah, I think it still goes to the agencies as well and think about these kinds of things as these projects are being put together and presented. These are the kind of questions we're gonna ask. I think some of that stuff could be vetted before it ever gets there. If you know an area that's probably not gonna work, or there's some issues with it, let's look at some that maybe that you have some opportunity. Just a suggestion.
When I heard several of you mention like the importance of having permittee buy-in, you know, to what these proposed actions are. And then also, you know, there's a list of a lot of different types of information that could be included. And so I guess I'm sort of wondering if like for next steps, maybe meeting, you know, with federal range staff and like talking about what the limitations of information that can be provided and what permittee engagement might look like how we might get to some space like where we're maybe satisfying some of this, but I wasn't sure if maybe Yvette or Steph had any thoughts on that or.
You know, and, you know, I think these are really fair. Bigger view of, you know, how does the land management fit into the project, you know, tasked and projected. And grazing, you know, is a big part of that. And, you know, I think, you know, if we could just put it on a template, as far as, you know, providing information for these, you know, I think that's a smart thing to do, to have that information. As far as, you know, specific permittee involvement or, you know, kind of the bigger picture of that. I mean, that's a bigger ask and there's really specific problems, you know. You've got, you know, this golden example of somebody that's really doing it right and doing it well and trying to do things, and then these bad actors, you know, or, you know, these areas where we have no staff, you know, that are out, you know, out there checking on things. And so, you know, we can do it, you know, however you think is useful. You know, we can definitely, you know, have some rangeland folks come in and, you know, if you want kind of general, here's the process, kind of thing, but they're not gonna probably know, you know, the specifics surrounding, you know, this little area, you know, which are always very localized.
Yeah. Okay, just, if I'm reading the proposal, evaluating the proposal, and specifically says that the originator had worked it out and the permittee was willing to, was a participant, something positive about that, I would rate that more highly than if they just said nothing. And so that's that's my objective in it, just find out proposals where the permittee support is part of it, and we'll prioritize those, and ones that don't, well, maybe those aren't good ones for places for us to put our.
And like Steph, you know, indicated it might, you know, be kind of where we are in the plant, you know, if we're talking about an implementation, you know, the paperwork has already been done, the NEPA and that type of thing, which, you know, really means that the permittee had to be, you know, involved somehow, but it just us explaining that, you know, if it's something that's further back in, you know, it's still in planning process and that kind of stuff, that, you know, I think we can explain that we would need to bring the permittee on board for this to be successful or something, you know, it's kind of my thought. It's, I mean, it's you know, I think most of the things we're trying to bring are more mature so that those background talks have already taken place.
Yeah.
And that we just need to explain it, you know.
Well, you might even include housing fit within that. They already have.
Right.
You know, fences, the water, maintenance and all.
Yeah, I think that's a fair ask. And should be considered when they're bringing them forward.
You know, we'd love to talk with them, because I think just going over, making sure that information that we're asking for isn't something that has to do the Information Freedom Act there, and, you know, so we want to make sure that we're asking for stuff that's not generic, but, you know, just where we're not putting people through the ringer.
Yeah, I wanna I just wanna start off by saying, like, y'all have a big responsibility, and I understand that you volunteered to do it, so like, absolutely respect that. And I think that the intention behind this is great, and I think that what you're really asking us to do, like Yvette said, is show our work. You know, because I think we do a lot of this, but we're not great at communicating that we're doing it, because we're trying to put it on like 2 PowerPoint slides, you know, and get through a 10-minute presentation. And sometimes like the stuff, like to do some of the stuff that we do already that's represented in this takes 6 months and is maybe like a 100-page document, and we can't like necessarily. So that's maybe like a template, like Yvette said, would be excellent for us just to be like, here are a couple bullet points of all the things that you want us to hit so that we can communicate. I think that's a great idea. I also, like, I've talked several times recently with my counterpart in the range program, the statewide range program lead, Shannon, and she is more than willing to speak with y'all, like as a focus group or all of you on a Teams call, and I'm absolutely willing to set that up, and I would love to coordinate that and also attend, because some of this language maybe doesn't like dovetail with the language that we have to use, you know, like it, like a mitigation plan might be called something different, you know, or something like that. And we also have to be, I have to be really aware of our current priorities and the fact that we're a multiple use and sustained yield agency, of course. And so I think like, I think that we can give feedback and maybe like help make this applicable to BLM in ways that it might not currently be, but I really want it, like, I want to invest time and effort in making that feasible so that we know, like, when we're filling out the template, like if this project is going to get ranked well or not, because we're saying yes or no to a majority of the questions on it, and that saves both of our time. Like, I think that's like a really good thing to like put time into. So I don't know if like I can get into all the details like right now, but I've already done a lot of groundwork to prep that conversation on the back end with our state range lead, and she's supportive of it, and I'd love to do that. Yeah. Yeah,
So for that, it would be the subcommittee whenever we could get together, like on Zoom or something.
yeah, I think that Zoom, Teams, yeah, that, whatever makes sense. And I can set that up, or maybe like Caitlin can help or something, but yeah, I think that's no problem. I think we're doing a lot of it already. It's just a matter of like explaining where we're at, and it might be different places in the project development that require different things. So we might not have gotten there yet, but maybe we have, and we can show that to you. I also like, just because I've heard a couple of like folks say that the permittees do the monitoring, and I can't speak for everyone, and maybe that's the case sometimes, but that's not my experience. Like, I've been part of interdisciplinary teams going out and doing range health assessments and function and condition assessments on riparians, and a lot of that's done in-house as well. So it's not, I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable just like letting y'all think that that's the blanket statement across the board.
I think you're correct there.
Yeah.
I do, I wasn't implying it.
No, I know, and just for like other folks, you know,
It's
that might not
becoming
be
more
familiar.
popular, but staffing, but I remember years ago, there would be a few guys I would work with, let them do their own, but those were guys I knew were gonna do this stuff. Yeah, but we didn't just hand it over to them.
Yeah, I just went off it just
Yeah.
because of that one.
Yeah, that's kind of what it says, so I don't know, some places may be doing a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And I'll say, like, because I've been kind of digging into it a little bit, it's like, there's a lot of variability in what kind of monitoring is required.
That's correct.
Allotment plans and, you know, a lot of it in cities in place, listed species or not, and that type of stuff, and so. It's, you know, there's a huge array of stuff, you know, I think, you know, a lot of the permittees are the ones kind of making the call, like, it's time to move to this pasture, you know, and, you know, doing that type of monitoring, but, you know, going out there and doing utilization, you know, or any kind of sciencey kind of stuff, that they're probably not the ones doing it. If it's getting done, it's in-house.
It amazes me though, that the permittees, sometimes, not all, most of them are good. I'm not gonna say they're not, but there's times though, it's like, why would you want your livelihood to turn to dirt? I don't get it. You know, just as.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think what I've seen is there's a really big difference, you know, among, you know, different grazing associations on how well they're managed. And, you know, the individual, like some of the forests, it's like they've got permittees that have the whole allotment, and it's one permittee out there. And then like what's really common in northern New Mexico is there's, you know, yeah, these community where these guys, you know, they have 10 or 15 cows out there, and you know, you're trying to manage a whole bunch of people. And so some of those that have a strong association, you know, tend to be a little more conscientious than the ones that aren't as well organized. And so it's, you know, I'm not making excuses for anything, but it's very different depending on the, you know, how things are being run out there, on how easy it is, or who's making the calls and that
Yeah,
type of thing.
which is exactly where we're trying to just be.
Yeah, and getting the information, I think is
Fair.
fair,
without being
fair enough. Yeah, I mean,
religious with what our wants are.
and I think that's fair to, you know, the public investment of the HSPs to provide this, you know, what the expected, you know, if that was the root of the cause of the degradation, is it being addressed, and, you know, is the expectation that it would be successful.
Thanks for your work. I don't know who all was on the video. Four of us. No. Jimmy's the one. Good deal.
What'd I do?
Well, good ideas from Jimmy.
Also for next steps, I mean, are you all thinking that you want to potentially set up this meeting and maybe come back at a future public meeting, or?
Yeah. Yeah, I for one would be particularly interested in why you can't use range money. So I can use range money to fence cows in, but I can't use range money to put up a fence to keep cows out.
Oh, so asking those types of questions and having
Yeah.
that forum, yeah.
Yes, Steph indicated that there couldn't be any wildlife benefit, or the wildlife benefit couldn't be the focus of using any sort of range funds. Right, so that would imply that, like, if I put up a fence to keep cows in, that's okay, but if I put it up to keep them out, then I can't use range money for it, but it's a fence, right? So,
It's often. Because.
well, I mean, it could just be my fault for assuming that it has to make sense too, right?
The challenges of it. And that's just like the landscape that we live in, and so it's like a conflict in a lot of this conversation. And two, like, I won't say that range money can't go into like wildlife projects, because we have folks putting labor funds in, we have range folks going out in the field and helping us with maintenance and fence building. They're putting their time and effort into doing the analysis for environmental analyses for some of these projects. They're reaching out to our permittee partners and like ranchers. Like, there's a lot of monetary investment going into it in different capacities. And also, like, there are collaborative projects, I'm sure, that I'm not thinking of, that are like both wildlife and range going into landscape restoration projects with fencing and other components. And a lot of like the weeds program is partnered to the range program, and so invasive weed treatments that benefit wildlife, that are often wildlife like informed and driven also. So there's a lot of overlap there. It's like a Venn diagram, not two separate circles. But I guess I just wanted to make the point that some of the like the fencing projects that we're putting to the table for y'all are projects that have been identified for wildlife funds. And if we don't get the funds here, then we're gonna have to ask other NGOs, or we're gonna have to try and ask headquarters, or I'm gonna have to try and find it in the budget that I manage for the program. And so I just didn't want there to be a misnomer that the HSP program was funding fences that the permittee was like solely responsible for, I guess. And so I know that everyone probably already knew that, but I just wanted to like set that as kind of the context of the conversation.
Yeah, it's hard to explain to public people when you say, yeah, we put $100,000 in to protect on this spring that was degraded by cattle.
Oh, yeah.
And now we're protecting it, but nobody else who did it puts any funds in it. It's like, the public is like, what's wrong with this picture? Well, it's not hard to see, it's like, the range and funds, like Jimmy was saying, is like, if we put $100,000 in and the range and biologist was able to find some funds somewhere to match with our funds, well, that's helping the permittee as well.
Yeah.
And the wildlife on our side, so we're partnering. And one partner doesn't make two partners. That's the problem that has been, that we've seen. And that's.
You look kind of where some of the range funds come from. Typically they're generated through range betterment funding, but part of that fee that they pay every month, 50% of the dollars supposed to come back to those forests. So those are half of those, when the permittee pays his fee, half that's supposed to come back to the forest.
It's not a lot of money.
It's not very much money, but on the forest I was on, we used to get under 70,000 for the
Yeah.
entire.
Yeah. Yeah, it's literally 50 cents.
What's that?
I said it's literally 50 cents.
It's not very much.
Oh, it's
money.
70 cents. What is it? $1.30 now or something? $1.20?
$1.35, something like
For the
that.
forest,
Yeah.
I don't think that, I think it's more general. I think we often put in fences to protect, wildlife type things, especially if there's listed species with range money. But I think that the bigger thing is the range money pot is about this.
It's little bitty stuff.
It doesn't.
What it used for us, it used to basically buy enough material for a fence or two or some reconstruction or something.
But the wildlife pot's about that big too, so it's like we're usually looking for different, and they keep changing kind of how the color of money, and what it can get spent for with us, but sometimes it can get paid for out of different types of vegetation
I read some pretty.
management money and that type of stuff. And so we're always, we're trying to be creative, I don't think it's cut and dry,
Yeah,
it's,
that's what I was trying to say. I think
Yeah.
in presentations, we're all trying to do a lot with a little, and if, like, there's collaboration, but we can't always ask a partner to cover something that's like on paper a wild fence, and so we're doing our best, but, yeah.
Is there any funds other than like the stats that I was reading for, I just recall it to 2015, that was 80 million went funded to the DOI, and then almost half of that went to administration. Then there was supposed to be 36 million that went, this is for all the states. But only 15 million came in on the grazing monies. So those monies, if you take 15 million and put it on all the millions of acres in all the western states here, it's nothing. So is there any other funding that is out there for the range biologists, or is that the only thing they're working with?
We never had that much fun to work with on range projects. There's part of it. It was always very limited. And we used to go with those range improvement projects to the grading permittee meeting every year, not be what we wanted to do. So they were very specific to the projects, most cases. We could do something different than we had to do, but it was generally put in on range improvements.
I think I wanna I don't wanna put myself in a position of speaking on behalf of our range program, cause it's not me, And so that's why I want like these ideas of like the range budget, or like even like the up-to-date land health standards and monitoring questions that you have. Or like the overlap of range and wildlife and like their other NGO partners and sources of funding through various agency efforts, like all of those are great questions that I think I want to make sure that I give like the expert in the room who's not in this room the opportunity to answer. Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah.
We should try to set that up. I'm flexible almost all the time, somehow or another, except for when I'm not there.
Well, thinking about timing a little bit, I mean, we're early March right now, so I mean, if this meeting could happen sometime this month. And then the subcommittee had time to kind of wrap their heads around whatever comes from that and, potentially make some modifications to this. I mean,
I did all. Sooner the better.
so what we could do, I mean, I can definitely get the subcommittee in contact with Stephanie and then maybe Yvette too, just in case there's any Forest Service questions, maybe there's some questions for Forest Service range. And then you all can vet that out. And then as far as getting back to the full committee, I mean, there's lots of flexibility. I mean, we obviously have our regularly scheduled meetings, if you wanted to just add this as an action item for when we do presentations later this summer. Or if you want to have a standalone meeting where it's just this one thing, I mean, we can call a public meeting anytime you all want, as long as we give the proper amount of public notice. So there's lots of flexibility there, but for the group, I mean, would you all want potentially to have like a quick virtual meeting, where we can have a public meeting and just handle this one issue, or maybe just lump this on with the June meeting? It's something to think about. We don't necessarily have to have the answer now. Yeah, we could add it on in June. I mean, or July, yeah, whenever we do the presentations, whenever that is. Cause I mean, for us, I mean, I think that we can kind of read the room and like, we all understand that you'd like to know a little bit more of the picture of range. And so like, that's something that we could at least attempt, to incorporate in the meantime, while you all are working this out, as far as specific recommendations. Just offering that up, as far as next steps, since we're,
It's out there on the table now.
Mhm.
So.
But just in. Proposals. Yeah.
It's
That's, being discussed right now. Yeah.
either
be prepared, because these are some of the questions we're gonna.
Mhm.
Presenter, that's good to know.
Yep.
From the preparations. Let me go inside.
Is it possible to account for more back and forth? Like if we create more robust proposals, whatever. There might need to be a little bit of space in the summer, like. Proposal presentations, and so just also putting that out there, so that. Yeah. We're not some of that would be like. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Q and A, yeah, so I mean, it could potentially get to a spot where having 2 days, like to go through all the presentations might be where we end up, with this, and I don't think that's a bad thing, but that could be.
I mean. Wouldn't it be done?
Mhm. Yeah.
It's-
Yeah. And, there are a lot of great systems here that I think we're already doing that some that are maybe bigger, like full mitigation or restoration monitoring plans, or like looking at restoration landscapes, like these are really big concepts that like maybe that's the intention, or maybe we have to like wiggle and find like the kernel of it, that makes sense, but either way, like that's gonna be a lot of investment between now and with other workloads going on, and so I just want to like make sure that the field office biologists understand like what the mark is so that they can hit it, for the proposal. So even if we have this meeting with our range folks, like sooner to kind of like mesh some of this out, and then we see how that goes this year. I don't know if that's like an option too, but I think more concrete feedback sooner is more helpful so that we understand the level of effort that y'all would like to see.
If we have the meeting and then everything is, we can see what people, other folks think of stuff and go from there. There's no reason why it would just take a little bit of effort to adjust it, do a quick Zoom meeting and put it out there.
Yeah.
Or at that point, you would still know after that meeting that we're not there's not much change, or it's a simple scenario. And we all would know at that point.
Yeah.
Since it's not adopted yet.
Yeah, I think that's good. So I'll maybe, for the range meeting specifically, I can get Shannon and I's, coordinated availability and send that to Caitlin, maybe. She can send that out to y'all.
Cool. All right, well, yeah, I think that sounds like solid next steps for that one, and it seems like it might lead to something, so that's good. Okay, well, I think that we might be ready to move on to our next item here, which is really just kind of wrapping up other potential projects that we're kind of cooking up for this year. So a number of those have already been sort of brought up. So there's a few others that we might want to briefly discuss, and haven't heard from fisheries in a while, so I'm not sure if you guys want to talk about what you're thinking about potentially bringing forward this year for consideration, and seeing if the CSC had any feedback on it.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, I don't know if you want me to. But no, yeah, I mean, we haven't really fully vetted things. Mostly what I want to say about fisheries is, we are hiring a new assistant chief. The group that I manage, research and management, also had our habitat and compliance groups in it. Which was quite a lot, all the fisheries stuff, all the research, all the habitat, all the compliance. So we split habitat and compliance out. We just hired a new assistant chief for that. And so as we go forward, there's kind of going to be a bigger coordination effort between us and BLM and Forest Service to try to get a more extensive list of fisheries projects on the books. Not specific just the habitat stamp, but a broader kind of conclave on potential fish habitat projects. I mentioned a few of the things that we're specifically thinking about. We're still not 100% sure what Jack Creek Fish Pier will land, but that is still a need. Brown trout have started to get above that barrier, and that's an important population, and we may come to you all, with that once we really understand what the ask is. Unfortunately, we had a very good site for that barrier, and there's not another really good one to move it to, and it's gonna have impact on the road, and that leads to, you know, much more complexity administratively and construction cost wise. El Rito, I'm really think we're gonna have plenty of money to do all the design work on El Rito and get an answer about that with what we want to do. Unfortunately, access to that site's really complicated, but we may actually be able to fund a fair amount out of that capital appropriation we got from the legislature specifically for fish barriers, but I suspect there will be some balance there, and since it's a project that we've already talked to you all about, that's one that's likely to come back around. We are really in preparation mode. I presented last year about YY fish and specifically YY brown trout. And we've had really good news in that arena, which is that we won FDA approval to develop that brown trout broodstock. In December, we got the final approval, and we had already put all the pieces in place to be ready. So we are right now in the process of feeding brown trout to get them to where we need to be to develop broodstock. And so that has us looking both at some old fish barriers that have brown trout above them, but still have cutthroat, as well as a few new places. There's a huge system, the Las Vacas, where you all are working in the lower reaches. The upper reaches, there's a fish barrier there that more than 5 years ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago, we had a barrier assessment done, and that barrier needs some upgrades. It has brown trout above it. The main part of the barrier is okay, but there's a few things that need to be done to really make that a solid barrier. So that's something that wouldn't be too surprising to see us come to you all with. And then Alamitos, and there's that. You had a few others that you were thinking about on your list as well, right?
Yep. I think, you know, I think we're just trying to figure out what's gonna come forward this year and what's gonna come next year. A lot of this year might depend on, you know, whether those funds that we had, kind of anticipation and already in agreements got turned back on. That would be for like Talita and Dry Blue work. Also work on the San Antonio Creek, which is already kind of planned and paid for. That's the San Antonio on the Carson. So it's the other things that probably have come on, you know, maybe come in front of you guys in the next couple of years is we're working with Reclamation right now to come up with a game plan to rebuild farm lakes on the Carson, because that blew out several years ago. It's going to be a big project, and so that's something that we've been working with Game and Fish on. Hopefully coming up with a game plan with that. There's some different aquatic stream crossings, you know, that would provide better passage for aquatic organisms and that type of stuff that we have, especially up on the Carson that we're working on. And so those might come in front of you guys. Yeah, a lot of stuff still kind of in flux, and you know, hopefully it'll come together in the next couple months. And you know, we took hopefully do some more kind of meetings and figure out. I think there's a lot of I don't know how with as dry as it is, how well stripes burns will come off this year. We'll see. I know I talked to Lincoln, they've got a lot of kind of stuff in the works, but I think it's gonna come out next year. They've got some kind of grassland stuff, maybe to benefit quail and turkey that they've kind of got in the pot bubbling that they'll talk to you guys about. So yeah, I don't have a really good solid list of what to expect for this year, but you know, everybody's it's on for the minds, you know.
I would add to those, I don't know if McChrystal has come up on your radar.
do that, but we're starting to hear a little bit about it, and I think it's something we're interested in. It sounds like there was some conversation with Lisa.
Yeah, we're expecting designs to rebuild that road stream crossing for McCrystal Creek. And so we think we have money through the Fish and Wildlife. We had a bunch of money obligated through the BIL, through Fish and Wildlife for a bunch of culverts and stuff on the Vidal to replace. That's another one. We'll see. We'll know more hopefully soon if those funds get turned back on and we can proceed forward with them. If the funds get turned back on, we have enough money to do them, we think, at least some of them, but yeah.
And I think we have some interest in a potential future in-stream kind of fish habitat thing there too, but we'll work together to develop that. And then we're also above Bonito Lake, we're working with the city of Alamogordo. We're trying to get an agreement signed right now to work on city property. But then that would then potentially connect up to Forest Service above that, which I think would be a really nice HSP potential tie to there's a lot of potential funding opportunities for the city on land there, but there would probably be some additional opportunities. Forest Service has done great work in that drainage already, and of course, there's been lots of BLM work lower down in the system, but we're hoping to get Cutthroat back in there in 2026, starting in 2026. And it's there's gonna be just some really cool opportunities for work in the US system.
Anything else for the wildlife center? Potential projects this year?
No, I think both Stephanie and that kind of brought up some of the ones that I was interested in potentially getting some feedback on, that maybe like the water maintenance projects we haven't seen come forward. And seeing is that would be a newer thing, trying to get that right, if it's to come forward and where we're putting that. Where we may do that, Cottage Zone or Fort Stanton. So I don't know, at this point, I think just if there's any feedback beyond what has already been discussed on all that work.
It would be, wildlife and, fisheries, but I've been told that the Bias Caldera is going to be doing a pilot test of the virtual fencing this season. And, I don't know if any of you all are involved or know about it or whatever, but I've mentioned this several times because it seems to me if it works, it's the solution to all these fencing issues that we have in riparian areas. And it's the first, I think it's the first one other than, I think Jemez Pueblo got some money to do virtual fencing. I have no idea how that's working out or if they've even started, but Bias Caldera, I think they're really planning to go with it.
I know they've been using the virtual fencing down these last range for a while. But I think somebody from New Mexico State did some presentations on how it worked. I can't remember. I can find it. I sent that to Daniel a while back, but I can get more information.
The Forest Service, the Hickory of Carson and Farmington BLM are doing a virtual fence project in Governor Door, which is in Rio Riba, east of Farmington. And then there's another in Colorado's doing quite a bit of virtual fence in their Forest Service out of the Durango. So yeah, it's starting to take off.
So anyways, I would be jumping on the table supporting for virtual fencing if any projects come forward for habitats stamp.
Not quite sure what question to ask.
Well, from the rest of the CC, are there any other project types that are particularly interesting for you two? Maybe we can go through, anyone who's interested in offering that up.
So Daniel, are we likely to see like additional phases on some of the larger projects? Or are we done with some of those? So there's like some. Mount
Yeah, I
Taylor
don't think-
projects and things like that?
I don't think that you'll see like another thinning on Black Mesa, but
Okay,
Black Mesa is part of a prescribed fire. So you might see it in that way, but that's kind
Okay.
of like what that, thinning efforts would evolve into, but I'm not sure of any others. I mean, there's potential that a fencing project, maybe like a phase, like something like from the Taos Plateau or from Macho. But those are really the only ones I could think of. I mean, I'm not sure Caitlin
No,
or
I
Brock.
mean, multi-phase ones, but you already funded first two phases.
Yeah, so it won't come forward again this year, so.
Right.
Oh, yeah, it was discussed, potentially, continuing the work on Rio Bonito, like in an additional tract. So in addition to what's being done this year is potentially doing another one. So that could come to fruition, maybe. I'm not sure of any others. Trying to bring you guys some different stuff.
Well, the greatest impact in that.
Yeah.
There were several, so. and then
Oh, actually, I guess that there is, so years ago, the perimeter fence around, the enclosure fence around Stewart Meadows was funded by Habitat Stamp Program, and yeah, Brock, I don't know if you want to bring that one up.
Yeah, we've been working with Forest Service to get the compliance done, the ARC surveys and the environmental assessment and tribal outreach and all of that. That is in a 60-day comment period beginning now or last week or next week, but somewhere right in here. So that should be shovel ready to be presented to do in stream floodplain reconnection within the fenced perimeter.
Which street?
That's the Rio San Antonio, or it flows in on the Carson, yeah.
So, yeah.
Several projects that are, were proposed by our field offices that had either and or upland riparian component. Is there a lean for this year if you'd like to see more work invested in either of those areas, or just kind of comprehensive, whatever makes sense for the project? I think there's a lot of projects that can do like upland treatments to benefit the watershed scale, but aren't necessarily like kind of scalable.
Cool. But that would still follow with, upland and then later on, being multi-year.
Yeah, they could be multi-year. Some of the like landscape scale treatments that I brought up earlier today in the presentation had like planting woody species in like riparian areas and doing like maybe some minimal check dams or removing salt cedar. But they also could include removal of juniper encroachment and replenishing seed banks in upland areas as well to help with like a runoff effect. And so I wasn't sure if like either of those arms of that project felt like more interesting for y'all or a better investment for funds in your opinion.
I think it depends on where it is and the impact of that.
I would just recommend that, when we bring those projects forward, we explain all of that, or, if it's like, this is what we're asking, this is the kind of bigger
What's to continue on the
project.
Yeah.
what you want to do again.
Well, it's probably better in a lot of sense to do the upland part of it before you do the spring part of it. Because it's connected.
Well, our next item here is a public comment. So anyone who's here, if you would like the opportunity to say something, you can raise your hand and do so. And anyone who's watching online, if you would like to talk, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you. So yeah, any volunteers? Anyone want to talk? Yeah.
Talk about some of my favorite fishing spots in Freedom. And San Antonio. But upper end of that. Walked all that out and fished it. And reached them. Full of chumps.
Still have chunks. Good. Found trout.
Appreciate.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I have a comment that may be coming out of not knowing enough about everything going on, but on your criteria prioritizing list, when somebody gives you a proposal, in that document, is there anything about how many permittees exactly and getting that data are around that particular proposal? And how much their allotment is and how many, what size their operation. So you've got an idea of the amount of pressure that's being put on by the entities that you may or may not be able to fence in or fence out. That to me would help prioritize. If you've got 15 permittees and they're overutilizing their allotments, data should show that a little bit. And if I were serving a dinner to people and I knew I had too many coming to the table, I'd either serve them less or I'd put them down at the bottom of my list. So I don't know if that data is something that's in your priority list or not, but from my perspective, that would be very valuable data in figuring out how I would prioritize how I was going to, if I can control how many cattle that are on there, at least I can look at how many that I'm gonna have to contend with for the success of that project.
Yes, I think a lot of these, we're talking about the amount of cattle on it, allotments for that allotment that's allowed there. And are they going to be there? Have they been there? Are they there? Will they be there? And it's in, I think it's pretty much in there on that kind of stuff to where it will tell you how many cattle or the issue. It should explain the issue of why it's degraded. That's.
Yeah, not
100%.
Not.
Yeah,
There's not a lot of overlap sometimes.
right.
Allotments, there may be, along the watershed stuff. A lot of these projects are within one allotment. So.
Yeah, we think now they do the year-long allotments or they seasonal allotments and those are big. Some allotments, they never leave them, but they're 12 months a year and southern ones ago.
Well, I looked at, so you'll send everybody out copies of that stuff?
Yeah, I'll just forward your email since we've had that open discussion. I'll send it to you. Yeah, it's been an open public meeting, so now it's fair game. Yeah, it's fine. I would just like let people know it's a draft, nothing's final.
That's something that's up in stone and it's meant to be able to be readdressed and adjusted as needed.
All right. Yeah, unless there's any other public comment, we have only a couple of items left. So I think there might be some field trip ideas coming up soon.
Yeah,
Potentially.
just wanted to, there was something there. Rio Bonito implementation. What's that?
First weekend.
The long drive.
I wouldn't be down there
Yeah.
on the 14th,
Yeah.
but, and I would make it a point to go over there. I'll take my wife to let me go out.
Oh, you're good. That's what, you know, I wanted people to throw ideas out as we want.
Yeah, if there's projects that folks are interested. Assuming that we're.
Yeah, I was thinking Rio Bonito or Whitewater that are, you know, going to be implemented right now, near future. But any other ideas too?
And I think I didn't, it'd be cool to, even though it's not an HSP project, the Rio Sequoia, the hatchery, really done all the low tech process for restoration. There in Hammond, that's pretty easy for folks to get to, take a look at what was done last year.
Comment that, I think that's what Rio Grande Return is proposing for the Bacchus, one that we
Yeah.
approved last year. It's the blueprint for the Bacchus.
And that's what they're doing on Chimo Williams. Yeah, all right. Those, the Savoy is pretty easy to get to, which is the next thing. Some of these others are
There's
little hiking.
no, completely dry. Easy to get to now.
I'm good and interested in.
Yeah,
We can get involved in. I just got really going.
Whitewater.
In the beginning of May.
Whitewater might be a good project since it's gonna be just completed soon, see it after it's eventually done. And at some point we can go back and see how it looks after 2 or 3 years, just that initial project completion.
Yeah, people wanted to stay up. Look it up to Willow Creek.
You could do that in a day, right?
Depending on where you're staying.
Yeah. Glenwood, you see the catwalk in the Whitewater Wood. It was, you know, some of the roads open. Fire restrictions.
Yeah. But yeah, that's something folks could probably, depending on where you're coming from, but you could see both those projects in.
All right, well, I guess that kind of brings us to the end, so for just some quick closing remarks, I've been helping facilitate these meetings for about 6 years, but I'm stepping over to a different side of the habitat and land section, and so I'll be over the wildlife management areas now. So today will be my last meeting kind of facilitating stuff, but I just have to say that over the past 10 years, I've really watched this program morph from something that, really was not functioning at all, it would have been one of those in the red, if it was on a vet's list, into something that's really something to be proud of. And so just my hat's off to all of you for your time and effort in doing that and being a part of it. So anyhow, that's all that I've really got for it. So if everyone is good, we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
You got it. No, just a ladder. Yeah, back on probation. Yeah, they got a chance to drop the cleaver right now. Yep. But yeah, so if everyone's good, we can entertain. Oh yeah, go ahead. I don't think there wouldn't be any impact to this program. As far as like what impacts it might have to the agency, we'd have to see how it all gets carried out if it passes. But for this, potentially, yeah. But yeah, for this entity, no, there would be nothing of consequence. Mhm.
So that. Well, I guess.
Segment. Expand it a little bit, but it's in good way.
When could the amount, the habitat stand be reconsidered? I forgot how.
Well, the
how long
rule
the
is on a
cycle-
10-year cycle,
10
and
years.
yeah, and so next year will be halfway. So 5 years after that.
So that the public wants to give us another 5, instead of not wanting to give us another 5 like you did last time.
Mhm.
And like you said, I think you can get there. It's just a matter of making sure that the public gets the projects that make the most impact to them. You know, and I think we're way working on that. I mean, fisheries included in it now. We should have a better opportunity to get that increase when we need it. And if people want to give it to us, I want them to give it.
I think you're right. That's exactly right. And I hear people just coming out of backcountry. People are really interested in what we're doing. People are asking me to share information, to share the things that we send out, and I give them a report every time we have a meeting or anything interesting happens. And people are interested. So I think absolutely.
Yeah, we'd love to see more videos and things like that one you showed, Caitlin, that on the
The
whitewater.
Forest Service did that.
Yeah, the Forest Service did it, but things to that nature, it can be smaller scale. I mean, it's not a small, quick video of we did this and so something that can get circulated like on YouTube and the other things that people use.
Yeah.
I don't know anything but YouTube. But yeah, there's a lot of ways it can get shared really quick and easy. And I think that's gonna be key in making people wanna be part of another $5. And we got 5 years to do it.
So their funding source, that amount that it is it the same this year as last year? I don't remember how all that worked. Or
Oh,
what-
what we think that we'll have?
Yeah, what we have this year.
Yeah, let's go back and look. I think it's gonna be right to. And it might be slightly more than that, but I think it's roughly 2 million.
That's a lot of funds to do some good work. Key part is, are we getting word out? Sure, people, do they know where the money's?
Because we're like car salesmen over the last 30, 20 years or whatever, since the program had been going.
Yeah.
I didn't like it. You know, and that's the perception of a lot of.
There's a
public.
lot of folks don't, they just, where's the money go? They don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure, but there's lots of knowledge that they don't know where it goes. It's somehow getting it out. I mean, it's that interesting, but social media or videos or something that lets people know this is a good program.
I think those videos go a long ways.
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have been, doing more to try to partner with our information education, with that to try to tap into their capacity to film projects and maybe get the word out on stuff. And so, yeah, it's in process, and it might take a while before we actually get there, but it's something that we.
That's the people think. Do it. These are great video things. Boom, send it out, you can put it on YouTube. You can get them out.
Department has the expo, the state fair, all those things, the kiosks. This is the habitat standpoint.
Yeah.
So it's focused on that.
Hmm.
It was a loop, a video or something.
Yeah.
I see too much HSP on the Instagram thing because Red's thing, it's not Red's, it's Instagram. Yeah. But that pops up on my phone constantly. I haven't figured out how to really use it. See it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little lean, yeah. Yeah. All right, well, yeah, I guess with that, if we're all good here, we can entertain a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we adjourn this meeting. Let's just go ahead and say ayes if you're in favor. Okay, nays if you're opposed. Ayes have it. All right, thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Take care.
You too. See you later, Jimmy. See you later, Art.